It's time for Windows Weekly. Paul Thurrott, Richard Campbell are here, and the big story, of course, victory for Microsoft over the FTC. Tune in for the details next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Windows Weekly with Paul Thurrott and Richard Campbell. Episode 837, recorded Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. A small internet boutique. This episode of Windows Weekly is brought to you by the AWS Insiders Podcast. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player or visit cloudfix.aurea.com/podcast. We'll also include a link in the show notes, and our thanks to AWS Insiders for their support. And by Brook Linen. Summer is in full swing, and Brook Linen is here to help you swap out winter warmth for easy breezy comfort with their award-winning sheets and home essentials. Visit brooklinen.com today and get $20 off plus free shipping on orders of $100 plus with the code WINDOWS. And by CacheFly. CacheFly delivers rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and 30% faster than other major CDNs. Meet customer expectations 100% of the time. Learn how you can get your first month free at cachefly.com. It's time for Windows Weekly, the show where we cover the latest news from Microsoft. And hell yeah, there's news. Heck yes. I don't mean to be profane. With us from Runners Radio, got the mug, get the T-shirt, Mr. Richard Campbell. He is in Coquitlam, British Columbia.
Yeah.
To his left, I'm his right, my left, Mr. Paul Thurrott, who is in Mexico City at the moment, enjoying a beautiful day in the city. And he is, of course,
a beautiful day.
Of course it is. He's from Thurrott.
And the occasional burst of stormtroopers.
Yes, it's we get rain every day, and I guess we get stormtroopers once a week. I don't know. Nice. So far, it's been okay. It's not a bad ratio.
Yeah. So, yesterday, breaking news, judge in San
Amazon
Francisco.
App Store for Windows 11 went generally available. Yeah, no, it's been a big day. I'm sorry. The other story.
The other story. We have, now I'm very confused because we've been reporting on this trial, this hearing. This hearing was, I did not realize, I should have read more closely, merely on the injunction that the FTC filed saying they better not do this merger before we have ruled. The administrative judge will be hearing the case in August.
I strongly recommend to everybody who cares about this to go and read this ruling. It is beautiful.
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the best line, I'll cut right to the chase. I just love this. There are, despite the completion of extensive discovery in the FTC administration proceeding, including the production of nearly 1 million documents and 30 depositions, the FTC has not identified a single document which contradicts Microsoft's publicly stated commitment to make Call of Duty available on PlayStation and parenthetically on Nintendo Switch. Yeah. Yeah,
but this is just on the injunction. This is not on. This is not the final ruling, which comes in August. Is the theory that they're going to go ahead and do the merger and then let the FTC do what they want in August, or does this ruling kind of get over? Kind of like, will the administrative judge in August look at the San Francisco judge and say, clearly there's no merit to this, and just throw it out? I don't understand why people are saying it's over.
There is a growing. Well, it's over asterisks, right? I would say that this ruling sets the stage for the end, and the end being they acquire Activision Blizzard, right?
Like before August, they could do this. July 18th.
They could do it right now. They could literally do it today.
The drop dead date's July 18th because that's then. So they'll probably do it in the next week.
So here's
and
what's
the UK,
going on.
And then they go, what? Screw you, UK. You can't have any.
Yeah. So I can't remember how this came to light, but there is a possible plan at Microsoft to just consummate the acquisition, despite what in other words, if we get by the FTC, We're just going to do it.
Right.
And the UK can figure it out.
Well,
you know?
and obviously,
So the
furthermore,
And then they could fine them, and they'll just protest the fines and go around in circles.
Drag it out because that's what happens.
The FTC, I mean, apparently FTC was worried about this, which is why they asked for the injunction saying, no, you cannot do the merger.
I describe this as the antitrust equivalent of a flight risk.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yes.
But it is not the final.
Point,
it's not the final, though. That's what's
weird.
But
the ruling makes it very clear. All of the discovery has shown there's no reason to stop the merger.
Yeah, no, this judge tore the FTC a new one.
Right.
Any future judge that looks at this case is going to have to look at that and say, "Could you please explain why this is wrong?"
Oh,
you know.
Yeah. Okay. So even though it's technically not precedent setting, you feel like it is.
So let's put. I guess the way I would say it is, the FTC has pushed forward a case to block this acquisition, literally on the merits of Sony's argument, which we now know to be baloney. Only what they have said publicly, because they just don't want it to happen, that they are worried that Microsoft will pull Call of Duty from their platform.
Even though they have
Complete
no
nonsense.
Evidence of that. And in fact, contradictory evidence to that.
That's right. Tons of it. So I've always found it bizarre. I've said this many times that a U.S. regulatory agency would protect a company from Japan over an American company buying another American company. And that's aside from all of this doesn't change the structure of the video game industry in the slightest kind of stuff. It certainly doesn't change the relationship of Microsoft to Sony in the console market, which is, I guess, the concern. You know, Sony has spent a lot of time and money keeping Xbox down as much as possible. In fact, I think that's potentially illegal behavior when they go and pay publishers not to go to Xbox, you know, that kind of thing. We can debate that. That's fine, whatever. But that's the FTC's case. So that was just proven. It was just ruled to be wrong. It's just not true. And we all know that. We're all logical people. We can look at it. We can see what's going on in the world. We know it's not true. Now we have a federal court, district court ruling that it's not true. So we have a little bit of precedent here, and there's a couple of things
that
in the
Microsoft forced, right? Like what I appreciate is that this was Brad Smith's plan.
That's right.
Was to force them into this so you get the ruling to just stop the postponement.
I don't know if I can find this quickly, but there's also language in this ruling that talks about how the FTC has had over 18 months to do this. Yeah. And when Microsoft came and said, we got to get this going, we've been trying to do this forever. Right. The FTC tried to block it. And the judge said, you had 18 months to investigate this deal. Yeah. You don't need any more time. No, you know, I'm
there's a point,
now.
But you're getting to a point of bad faith. Like if it wasn't a federal agency, if it was another entity, the judge would go, "Are you crazy? Yeah. This is bad faith.
You are wasting the court's time."
Yes.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's to the point where it's like, who's getting a share of the $3 billion? Like, what's going on here?
I know.
Like, you seem desperate to get him over that line.
So this is not victory parade balloons and confetti quite yet, but this is a major victory. And we all know there are two regulatory bodies that have tried to block this. This is a major defeat for the only one of those that matters. No offense to the UK, but it is, I think, telling that literally that day, that day. Now I know they stepped it back a little bit, but the UK CMA, the Competition Market Authority, came out and said, you know, we're willing to renegotiate. And this is to the point that the EU competition commissioner made back in May when she compared the way that the EU and the UK had handled this kind of regulatory stuff. It's like some people believe that your job is just to stop things from happening. It's like, no, your job is to do the right thing for competition and consumers. And it is, what the UK is trying to do now is what it should have done all along, which was, we can't pass this unless you make some concessions. Let's talk about those concessions. And now that's what they're saying. And it's like, guys, you know, you could have done this months ago.
Yeah.
You could have done this months ago. It's a lot like what the FTC tried to do there in June and just drag it out. They just, you know, in other words, foot dragging so that that date comes and goes and the two companies say, forget it, you know. It's just so insidious, you know?
Okay, but is there any are you going to look back in a year and say, look how horrible that merger was for us as consumers, or maybe
so
for
this
Microsoft?
isn't Minority Report, and I cannot rule on a future crime. But here's what I'll say, and I think this is important.
It is kind of a merger of two big entities to make one even bigger
it sure
entity.
is. It's
bigger entity that's not as big as the other entities that are already in the space.
That's right. They're two big entities, but they're not as big as the.
We should allow the agglomeration of all.
Sure,
of these.
it does. It absolutely means we should not block it. That's not reason to block it. That's not how the law works. Look, we can sit here and sort of be like, to my mind, I don't feel that it's fair for a couple of big companies to, and it's like, that's cute, but is what happens.
No, okay.
So,
you're right. The law says it has to be a monopoly. It's not a monopoly. So it's not, they're not using their monopoly power to enter a new market or anything like that.
But
to answer your law aside, is this bad for gamers?
Let me answer your question. No. That's the point. Think so. It absolutely is not. No, it's not. I mean, look, there might be things that happen in the future. We go, but you got to kind of step through the stuff. The most important are all of the deals that Microsoft made with its competitors to bring key games, especially Call of Duty, to their platforms too.
Right.
Microsoft's claim that all we want to do is make these games more broadly available is a fact because it benefits them.
Yeah.
Microsoft
and Game Pass as a whole is an effort to make more games available to more people for longer.
Right. So
it's a way to keep old games alive.
The third biggest market for video games is consoles. That market is starting to fade, by the way. That came out in the court documents. The second biggest is PC games, which actually I think surpassed console
in
revenue,
dollar, not in dollar amount, in number of units. What?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. I can only speak. I don't really have the exact statistics on this stuff. This is just.
It surprises me to hear there are more PC gamers than there are console gamers, but okay.
Console gaming is a small market.
I guess
there are 1 billion something PCs in the world. There are 20 million Xbox Series X and S's. It's not exponential, but it's a tiny comparative market. The biggest market by far in video games is mobile.
Yeah, and that's obvious.
Microsoft has zero position in mobile. Right. They have a tiny position in PC, and they are in last place in consoles. If Microsoft should, through some strategy and by buying companies, somehow beat Sony in the console market, they are still a tiny part of the overall slice of gaming. And by the way, not that this necessarily factors into the legal decision that would go into allowing this. Sony is one of the most belligerent abusers of a market that has ever existed. The behavior that came out during this whole episode is astonishing, and I think needs to be looked at by regulators.
The FTC should be moving on from this and on to anti-competitive practices by Sony.
Exactly. That should have been the takeaway from this.
Yeah.
But looking beyond that, and I think that the important part is it's not Microsoft is economically, driven to do the right thing, if you will, and keep these things on rival platforms. That's cute. But Microsoft is legally required because they have these agreements now to make that happen. So that's a completely different story. Will Microsoft release Xbox exclusives out of Activision Blizzard in the future? Yes. But you know what? That's that slice of the pie thing. What does it look like? The number of exclusives on PlayStation 5, the number of exclusives on Nintendo Switch, the number of exclusives on Xbox Series X and S. They can never keep up. They don't have enough games that they could make exclusive for that. They'll never compete on exclusives. So their best strategy is cross-platform. Microsoft wants the console market to die. They have to be realistic about it. It's not going away, not anytime soon, but it would be better for them. They're the only company in this business that loses money on every console they sell. That came out during this. It would be better for them if they could follow their most tried and true high margin business model, which is software and services, and just make it available everywhere, which is exactly what they've done with their biggest business, Office, right?
Well, all Microsoft cares about is selling more cloud and games run on cloud.
It all ties into this.
So you satisfied the business argument.
I think so.
But there's a little analogy.
You're a gamer. You're going to take it from the gamer perspective.
Yeah, from the gamer. There's a little analogy here that I think Richard might appreciate. I know you will, Paul.
Okay.
In 1896, a little beer company was founded in San Francisco called Anchor Steam Beer. They used a steam brewing process no one else does. And many consider them maybe the first craft brewery in the United States. I mean, this is 1896. About 8 years ago, they were bought by Sapporo. Now, this is a San Francisco landmark beer, just a classic. Yesterday, Sapporo announced they're putting them out of business. It's gone.
Interesting.
We have a little brewery over here called Lagunitas, wonderful craft brewery. Good friends of mine started it. They're happy because Heineken purchased them a few years ago, and they are 100 millionaires.
Right.
But I'm concerned the same thing will happen, that these big companies don't have the same incentive to produce small craft beers.
Yes.
I wonder what's going to happen to independent gaming if you have 5 giant companies dominating.
A couple of things, because you've set off a million things in my brain.
Now you want some beer for one, I know, but okay.
Yeah. So no. So look, Microsoft's not buying a bunch of craft beer brewers. They're buying one of the biggest video game makers on earth.
Mm-hmm. But their size alone means that it's going to be hard to compete against them. Maybe not. I don't know if you're an independent.
Well, how compete against them where? I mean, in other words,
they're just going to be so dominant that here's my real fear. But we're just going to see a bunch of first-person shooters and MMORPGs, and we're not going to see the innovative.
Okay, listen. There are 2 companies that we're talking about here: Microsoft, which owns Xbox, and Activision Blizzard. Microsoft, which owns Xbox, has a tremendous independent game studio called ID at Xbox. They have been pushing this forever. Activision Blizzard does not. So listen, remember, you got to go back to the beginning of this. This thing was announced in January 2022. In late 2021, all this news came out about the horrible workplace sexual discrimination, abuse stuff under Bobby Kotick at Activision Blizzard. And the big hope, remember up front, before we sort of addressed all the regulatory stuff, we thought, and also before Microsoft had their own problems with this, we said, Microsoft's going to clean this up, right? We look at the way Microsoft was such a good steward to Minecraft, a product that has expanded cross-platform compatibility.
And by the way, a Java product.
A Java product, yeah. Although, there's a non-Java version too, but their stewardship of GitHub, which has been incredible. We can look. The FTC tried to make a big deal of this, but we can look at their acquisition of ZeniMax Media, right, which is Bethesda, and you can say, "Oh, look at this! They bought this game studio. This game studio has hundreds and hundreds of games, and they made 2 of them Xbox exclusives. This is so sad. If you,
there is. By the way, I'm just thinking there is a business precedent because the FTC. I think it was the FTC blocked for a long time T-Mobile Sprint merger because it would then reduce us to only 3 carriers in the U.S. And they were able to get concessions that made Dish the 4th carrier, which is kind of nutty. So there's a precedent. You don't want too much consolidation in a market.
You don't. But there's also
there's a schism in gaming, right? The bottom line is if you want to make a game that actually utilizes the PS5 or an Xbox One S, you need $100 million at a team of 300 in 18 months to bust asses to actually utilize that.
That's right.
But there's another market that's always existed. That is the mobile gaming and the small game development. The internet exists.
That's true. I mean, you could develop a game for the iPhone yourself.
3 people, easy.
Small group.
Yeah, you could, but actually that speaks a lot to but that's what you were just talking about. So when the iPhone debuted, everybody and anybody had a fair footing on this store.
Look at
you
Flappy
as
Bird.
Bob on the street could exactly. Today that has consolidated. If you go and look, but not a lot of indie stuff going on in the top 10 down the App Store.
There's a lot of crap like Ebony.
But more to the point, that market has expanded such that there are like a billion whatever games in there, and really what you face is a situation where it's really hard to get Apple's attention because them promoting you is the only thing that can put you in front of all those eyeballs in a realistic fashion, and thus. Yes, an individual can still create their own game on a phone. It's possible.
But you might not see another Call of Duty.
You almost certainly. It's just like a lottery ticket. Like you might win.
Well, if you talk about the top dozen games out there that are $1 billion games, none of them are new, right? The industry has functioned this way for a long time.
Yeah,
it's too expensive to make these games to take any chances.
That's right. And listen, it's very interesting with technology that there will be these brief interludes that kind of change the way things are normally. So, for example, like Hollywood and these big blockbuster movies, right? For a long time, the only entities that could make movies were these gigantic corporations. Thanks to technology, individuals can make movies. Now, they don't go out and compete with Tom Cruise in a multiplex, obviously, but it's kind of fascinating how there's been they've just brought this kind of thing down to normal people, like what do you call this? I can't think of the right term, but that happens with tech all over the place. It happens in gaming. There are individuals can still do this. But
and it has happened recently. Like I would argue the last breakthrough game, not from the big conglomerates that has become huge, is Fortnite. And that's 6 years ago. So, I mean, if a game is hot enough, they've now formed Epic around it and so forth. And they had a bunch of other titles. But the reality is that was a breakout game. It wasn't even original, right? They were copying from PUBG. But they it turned into a hit.
That's right.
Like that
game was originally about building things.
Yeah. And it turned into a shooter. But the point being, the conglomerates move slow. It leaves room for agile, creative people to make great things.
All right. But we should go back to Leo's original example. We should just remember here that Anchor Steam did not have to sell the company.
Right.
They chose to do that. When you make a company, your goal is to make money somehow. You could sell it by, for example, Sam Adams was a craft brewer.
Yeah.
And now they exist in this weird nether region between big beer and craft because they're huge, but they're not as huge as Budweiser, which is owned by InBev now.
There's an even closer analogy. Rovio was founded by 3 Finnish college kids. And
they're owned by Sega now, I think.
20 years later, they sell for $1 billion to Sega.
But that's always the point, right?
Yeah.
When you form a company, the idea is to make money. And if one of the ways you can cash out big time is to be acquired, right?
Right.
So there are people on the side. So there's people on the street.
Then the next 3 kids from Finnish university to start their company, right?
Actually, it does, because it's like we could get rich.
We could be rich someday.
We could be the next Rovio.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're kind of looking at it from a personal standpoint. It's like, I feel bad as a fan of craft beer that this thing doesn't exist anymore. It's almost like saying, I feel bad that my indie band became really popular and sold out. And it's like, I don't like REM anymore because now they're on the radio.
Steam guys, but you keep coming to that business thing. But I'm not going to get any more Christmas ale, and that's sad for me.
I think there's a market demand there. Somebody else is going to make it.
Well, that's what Ada's saying in IRC. A beer, the brewers can just go around the corner and start another one and make a better version of it. So that's a good point. Gaming is not quite so easy to do, but
depends on the game.
Yeah. I'll tell you from my personal point of view, I am a addicted fan of this game created by a tiny, scrappy little company called Valheim. And it's just a small group of developers. They've made a lot of money selling it for $20 for the last, they came out in 2020 during the pandemic. And I think they really capitalized on that. I would hate for them to be bought by Epic or EA.
Yeah, but they would love for them to be.
They would be. They would be happy. But is it good?
It's not. I mean, we can't. Antitrust law can't be based on the fact that there's a fanboy out there that loves his little company.
Here's where this is a problem. It's not pure business. These are works of art, and so.
Okay, but.
I mean, honestly, the people who create it get to sell it, of course.
But we're not talking about this company. We're talking about Activision Blizzard. They're one of the biggest game companies.
I know they don't make
world.
anything.
It's a different. So. And by the way, the entire time they were steamrolling the industry and dominating and doing whatever they were doing, all kinds of indie games are still being made, right?
No, and they're horrific. And frankly, you could argue Bobby Kotick should not get $1.
Oh my God! That's obviously the worst part of this whole thing. I think anyone would agree to that.
But this gets him out.
No,
he goes away after.
No,
this.
He's on the board. I think he stays.
Okay, but he's not
operating.
He's not running anything anymore.
By the way, the other part of this is the FTC is probably going to appeal. In fact, we'll probably get news any minute now that
it could, except for one thing. So if you read a lot of the analysis of this in the morning, the overwhelming trend you're going to see is legal experts think these people have no case. This should never have been brought. They should never have done this. This is a fool's errand at this point.
I have to say,
you're right. It could happen.
When you read these stories, I'm saying this not to you guys. I know you know this, but to the audience, always consider there is a sometimes a subtext, which is, see that damn Lena Khan is over aggressive and she keeps losing. And so this is why you shouldn't regulate big tech. So there is definitely a group of people who don't want her to succeed because they want big tech to succeed.
To that point, though, that's very interesting because there's a real political thing there you could get into. There's sort of a feminism thing you could get into if you wanted to, right? But absolutely. Honestly, I think the argument I'm not going to look at sexuality or race or demographic or political party. If you look at what she has done, she has done potentially irreparable harm to the U.S. government's ability to regulate big tech because she has chosen the wrong targets and has lost.
You can make that argument. You bet.
Yes, and I want to be really clear.
There is a need for regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. We keep talking about this.
If you do it poorly, you cripple the ability to do it.
But the point I made in this probably December 2022 when the FTC said we're going to block this was I'm sorry, explain this to me. You've got Amazon, Apple, Google, and Meta running roughshod over these markets, harming competition, harming consumers. And you're going to go after this? This is where you're taking your stand? That to me was the stupidest. You've got these belligerent monopolists, or at least dominant market players, that are obviously doing harm, and you're going to go after this?
Yeah,
it just never made sense. It doesn't make sense today. And if they do appeal, they've jumped the shark.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
They're not paying attention.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's fair. Yeah.
I only spent a half hour on it. I think we're fine. Everything's fine. We're fine.
Okay, but we should. Okay, so I see this as a major legal win for Microsoft. Obviously, I do, because I have been saying exactly this thing for the past 18 months. It is personally pleasing to me to see a judge write a beautiful written thing that agrees with me. Right? She actually makes some mistakes in there.
Isn't there one issue though that her son works for Microsoft?
Yep. We get all these things we could point to, but I think the two.
That's a little bit concerning that she did not recuse herself, but okay. We have a judiciary that seems a little bit.
I mean, look, compared to the Supreme Court, this is. I mean, I don't know what this is. Skipping school. Yeah. So, the FTC, like you said, could appeal, right? So that's interesting. I hope they don't. I don't think they have the standing or whatever, but whatever. The UK CMA has, like I said, kind of said, just kidding, guys. Maybe we could renegotiate. Now they're talking that might require a new investigation. Same argument the judge made against the FTC. Are you kidding me? Come on, we know what your problem is. Just see what Microsoft's concessions do. And if you can meet an agreement, can we just meet an agreement? Seriously? You look ridiculous. And then there's that wild card, right? Microsoft could, and I don't expect them to. Microsoft has been very friendly to all parties here, including, by the way, Sony, which is crazy. But, and said, look, we're going to work with you, But Microsoft could say, I'm sorry, we're going through with this. It's going to be a lot harder to unwind this thing after we've already done it.
Yep.
And they could just say, screw it. We're going to do it. You can't stop us. You could try to come back later and take it apart, but you can't stop us.
And they get a fine potentially from the UK, or
who can say? I don't know. Who cares?
All these things are possible. They're all appealable. Like you want to drag out legal games? Let the corporation.
But here's a little thing. I find that this is fascinating, and I don't think this has been written anywhere or discussed. The big holdout here the whole time has been Sony, right? Sony is trying to protect their little, empire they have in consoles. They've been terrible this whole time. They have pretended that they're afraid that Call of Duty will not come to their future consoles, or future versions of Call of Duty won't come. The thing is, Microsoft has offered the deal they offered Sony to multiple companies, and they've all accepted. The only one that hasn't is Sony. In fact, Sony never even responded to it. So if Microsoft were to acquire Activision Blizzard today, they could say, you guys never agreed to this. So, I guess we'll see what happens. Like it would be fascinating. And I'm not suggesting they should or will take Call of Duty away from Sony, but when you could make the case for exclusives starting to happen on the Xbox and things coming first to Xbox, and we only make it available on our streaming service and not on yours, because if you would just sign the damn thing a year ago, we would have given you everything. And I think the situation should be a little different from a negotiation standpoint after they've been so belligerent and then been shown to have been lying the whole time.
Really, Microsoft should be filing complaints to the FTC for Sony's behavior.
I agree.
In fact, but Microsoft shouldn't have to. The FTC should be investigating this in the first place.
I know. Everyone should. The EU, the UK, everyone should. It's crazy.
But I guess you need a complainant.
I guess they need to complain. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. The EU always acts when a company complains. To some degree. They don't always invest.
Typically only when a European company complains, but either way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I got a funny story about that when we get to the Amazon thing. There's a really good EU kind of point in there.
Let's do the Amazon thing.
Okay. So we know that the EU has in recent months passed two, we'll call them anti-big tech laws, right? And they are specifically worded so that they're very clearly going after specific companies, right? And basically what this is about is size of market, gatekeeper, yada, yada, yada. So Amazon is the first big tech company to legally challenge one of the two laws.
It's a VLOP, right? They say it's a VLOP.
A very large online platform. That's right.
I love that.
And Amazon's trying to say, that's not us.
We're not a VLOP.
This is I don't know why this wasn't more. I found this myself. I don't understand why other people aren't calling on this hypocrisy, but Amazon says if that VLOP designation were to be applied to Amazon and not to other large retailers across the EU, Amazon would be unfairly singled out and forced to meet onerous administrative obligations that don't benefit EU consumers. Oops. As it turns out, a large European online retailer called Zalando that no one here in the US has ever heard of has in fact been designated as a VLOP, and that company is suing the EU because they too do not want to be in this. So what is your point? You're only doing this to Europe, to American companies? Oh, absolutely no, we're not.
This is the best headline from the Register. Obscure internet boutique Amazon sues EU for calling it a very large online platform.
That's great. I don't always like their headlines. I find them to be a little too much sometimes.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
obscure online.
I mean, they do make the point that there are European retailers. Amazon's not dominant in the EU as it is in the US, right?
Well, that's the interesting thing about this law. This law is not going after the dominant party in any given market, which is kind of how we think about monopoly, right? Obviously, in antitrust. It literally is setting up a situation in which companies that meet some bar are under a higher level of scrutiny, which in the United States, we typically wait until they're a monopoly. In some ways, this is more proactive. I don't know. But yeah, in other words, we acknowledge that the world has changed. There's not going to be a company that dominates a given market.
Sure.
Maybe there are just a bunch of big companies that are really big, and they're bigger than all those little, boutique companies, the actual boutique companies.
No, and now you get into cartelling and collusion. There's been plenty of FTC investigations between Boeing and Airbus as a duopoly.
Sure.
Yeah.
We call this the Japanese model.
Yeah.
But
if you call it Keiretsu, it sounds cool.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I help you.
So I have to say, and it's not like the EU's bar is particularly low, right?
No, you have to be big.
To apply as a VLOP, you have to be a big freaking company. And by the way, to your point, and you should appreciate this given the argument you made earlier, bigger companies should be held to a higher level of scrutiny because of their ability to cause harm.
Right.
Yeah. To crush markets.
It just makes sense.
And harm consumers.
Yes.
One of the disconnects is that this DSA is about disinformation, right? And keeping companies from spreading illegal content. But in response to the Amazon filing, the EU pointed out selling stuff counts. That content can be products that you sell, and so they want to hold Amazon to a higher standard for things like counterfeiting and so forth. Amazon says,
I would also
we've done
argue
a good
that
job
for
of
Amazon,
that, but
for Amazon and the other big tech companies in America, the bigger issue is the DMA, right?
That's right.
The other.
So that's what we should make clear. This VLOP thing is about is really aimed at social media, which is why Amazon says, but Your Honor, we're not social media.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, but I mean, how broadly do you want to define social media? I mean, are Amazon product reviews a form of social media?
And Amazon, even though they would like you to think they're a retailer, one of their biggest businesses is advertising, and the DSA is absolutely about advertising. So
yeah,
I think that this is. I understand their argument, but I think that the EU is probably right to include them in the VLOP.
Yeah. I look, the U.S. has outsourced antitrust regulation to the EU for the most part. They're not going after the companies that matter the most. I think any of us who care about equality and fairness or whatever, however you want to describe it, are hoping something happens over there. The problem with the EU is that they're very quick to rush to a decision. They're very slow from a legal process for that decision to turn into something that actually matters in the real world.
Yeah, they typically just toss out fines, and these companies can afford the fines. They don't need. And then
those fines get rescinded many times or reversed.
We should point out, Microsoft per se is not a VLOP, but Bing is a VLOS, a very large online search engine.
I mean, you would argue that LinkedIn is a VLOP, right?
LinkedIn is a VLOP.
Also
that's right.
Compared to the market leaders in their respective markets.
Here's the VLOPs, and they included Alibaba, which is also primarily retail, right? Amazon, Apple, Booking.com, Facebook, Google Play, Google Maps, Google Shopping. Didn't they close Google Shopping like 8 years ago? The EU thinks it's
probably
still going.
Google. So
don't get technical.
Instagram, LinkedIn, as you said, Pinterest, or as you say, Pinterest, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, Wikipedia.
Yeah,
that's
those
interesting.
Bastards. Those guys make me crazy.
But I think that's the point. Is not that this is this is not an accusation that you're screwing up, but that just that you reach more than 15% of our EU population with your stuff, and we want to hold you to a high standard.
Which, by the way, is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This isn't prosecution. This is just in fact, you come under our rules.
This is an interesting retort to the claim I would have made too, right? That the EU, from an antitrust perspective, has very specifically attacked U.S. companies, which granted are dominant in big tech. Big tech is all American pretty much. But it does feel like a little bit of anti-American whatever. And then you look at this and you're like, actually, I mean, obviously Americans are still, the dominant thing in there, but there are European companies as well. And I think that shows me that this is healthy, or it is one of the things that shows me this is healthy.
They'll have to have transparency reports. I mean, I think all of this is not a bad thing. It's, I think, telling that Amazon does not want to have to do any of this.
I think Amazon is going to be on the vanguard of a series of pushbacks from big tech.
And by the way, it's great to do this. This is how this actually becomes stable. When Amazon loses, maybe the rest of them will go, okay, well, we're going to lose anyway. I guess we're going to live with it.
We didn't really, we sort of skirted around this one earlier with the Activision Blizzard stuff, but there is an issue with big tech being emboldened by the FTC losing. And these things are not contradictory. Like, so when I say something like, I believe that Microsoft should be able to acquire Activision Blizzard, and here's why. I believe that big tech needs to be reined in and held to a higher level of scrutiny. There are some people, maybe they're not sophisticated enough to understand what I'm saying or why those things are not contradictory.
Right.
Those are both logical and to my mind right, but that's an opinion, obviously. But they don't contradict each other, right?
Not at all.
Microsoft is not dominant in gaming, and this doesn't change that. Microsoft is dominant in other markets, by the way. And yes, the US should look at Azure. Maybe it should look at the Microsoft 365 and Office stuff, and the Teams bundling that Slack is so upset about.
Don't be yes.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to write 12 articles tomorrow?
But and this is the point that Marguerite Vestager, if I'm pronouncing that right, said in May, which is each of these cases is individual. You have to approach each on its own merits. The goal is not to say no. The goal is to evaluate each and see what can be done, if anything, to reach some kind of a compromise that makes this make sense. And if no, then you say no.
Yeah, it's look for potential harm to consumers and mitigate.
That's right.
One of the mitigations can be blocking the merger, but that would be the inferior one.
Right. I don't mean to keep going back to the Activision Blizzard thing, but so many people are like, well, what if Yeah, what if? I mean, like, what if? We can't really regulate what if.
No.
You know?
Was it The Verge that said Microsoft neglected to bring its time machine to the trial?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I keep using the Minority Report thing. I'm like, we can't prosecute a future crime here.
Yeah, no, but that's fair.
But again, I really think
more
this
saliently,
is
why are you staring at what ifs when you could be dealing with known harm?
Right. And that's the thing. I think the thing that's unique about Microsoft, right? For example, when Google bought DoubleClick, a lot of people said, but what if, and they were right. You know, with Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, they have set a bunch of parameters by which they will operate here. Mm-hmm. They have really made important concessions. This one is locked and done. It's this. Yes. Like I said, there will be exclusives here and there. Yes, there will be things. Oh, see, I told you so. The people don't like. I get that, you know. But by and large, this is for a deal this size. There are so many uncertainties here. Mm-hmm. I think that makes this case unique in the history of antitrust regulation. Mm-hmm. I mean, at least in technology. I'm not an expert in, you know, whatever the broader world, obviously, but I just think I just keep saying the same thing. It just doesn't make sense to try to block this. Other than I just don't want it. I hate big companies, you know. And a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
Really or I need to score points politically, you know.
Well, wouldn't the world be
against?
Yeah. Actually, this is an interesting question. I don't know if it is true, but would the world be a better place if there weren't giant companies, but there were a bunch of, you know, $100 million companies instead of $1 trillion companies out there?
Unfortunately, companies are invented by humans, and we have bad nature, and that world cannot exist. That's like a Star Trek dream.
But we also, and there are also
a utopian fantasy, like the way every town should have all the things you need.
Yeah. A community has agreed that we are going to have one general or two general stores. Yeah. Two of these stores and two of these stores.
You should go down Main Street to get your video game from the artisanal video game maker.
We're going to call this place Utopia. Yeah. And then what's going to happen is the owner of one of the stores is going to come to the other one and say, hey, dude, I'm going to give you $100 million to close down. Because that's what happens. So would the world be a better place? Maybe.
Even taking human nature out of it. And this was, to me, this is an interesting point about the Vision Pro that Apple's making. Only a company worth almost $3 trillion with huge amounts of cash and willing to take 10 to 15 years to develop a product could do this. Right. The artisanal VR helmet maker down the street's not going to make the Vision Pro.
Let me bring that one closer to home for the purposes of this podcast. There have been only two companies. Well, there's a couple of I'll say two companies that have made major investments in cloud streaming for games. One of them has exited the market, leaving us with Microsoft, the other one. And then you've got these other companies like, NVIDIA, it's got a little side business with GeForce Now. There are other kind of cloud streaming businesses. We just learned about all of them because Microsoft made a deal with every single one.
Right.
So here's this company that through a series of decisions and successes and failures and acquisitions and whatever else has existed for 40 whatever years, whatever it is, and is now in a position where they can afford to do this work and have decided to do this work that no one else is doing. Are we going to deny them a very kind of American success story nature of what they've done and say, no, this market may be important in the future and we don't want you to dominate it? That is the exact opposite of innovation and what we should want companies to do.
I would argue that's consumer harm.
Yeah.
You're blocking innovation.
Microsoft started. It was two men in Albuquerque. It was the ultimate mom and pop shop. They operated over a dry cleaner in a strip mall, and they had dreams of success because they were going to sell programming languages. And that company has turned into something completely different and something completely bigger. Sorry. And part of it was because of some right series of decisions that were made. They didn't always make the right decisions. There were setbacks too, but they got to this place. And I mean, okay, is it not fair that some small company that has neat ideas about cloud streaming can't compete against Microsoft? I guess on some level it's unfair, but Microsoft doesn't have to do what they're doing, and they're doing it.
I just feel for the artisanal nerd helmet makers down the street. I think they
okay.
They're
well,
never
I
going to get
can't,
the
unfortunately,
chance, you know.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Listen. One of the best games I played over the past 10 years was, I hope I get the name right. It's Firewatch, right? You've played this?
Yeah. You go up in a tower.
Fantastic.
Was
Fantastic little game.
Was that an indie? Okay, it was.
Yeah, indie game.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, anything that games are so expensive that anything that's really innovative, it's just like the movie industry. You know, you're going to see a million Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, but every once in a while, somebody make a small film about.
Well, but Marvel is that thing too. So the comic book industry was at whatever small size it was in the 70s.
That's a good
and
point.
80s,
It was
90s.
tiny,
and then it was acquired by Disney.
But there's still graphic novels, and they're great graphic novels out there.
Yeah, and right.
New ones too.
It doesn't prevent that stuff from happening.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like if you in other words, like you were talking about craft beer. If you're a craft beer lover and you don't even have to live near San Francisco or whatever. Like you could be in any other state, anywhere in the world. Here's the thing. There is an incredible craft beer movement happening right now.
Yeah.
There are new companies coming up all the time. In my lifetime, I've seen some come and go in when we lived in Boston that I love. So, I mean, we all have this kind of nostalgia for something, whatever it might be. I'm going to talk about some tech nostalgia later. And the companies I loved, Commodore, right? Gone. Atari, and they're in name only. You feel bad.
It's the world. Yeah. All right.
Atari was only 3 years old. They were bought by Warner Communications.
I know.
I mean, so that was a million years ago.
Well, really, if you're successful, the sooner the bigger more successful you are, the quicker you're going to get snapped up by some giant conglomerate, which makes me beg the question: where the hell is the giant podcast enterprise that's going to buy us?
I knew that's what this was really. See, what you're really saying is, once it happens to you,
what about
the word artisanal is never going to come out of your mouth again.
What about
the last one?
What about my wallet?
I knew it.
No.
Yeah,
just kidding. Those days, if they ever existed, are long gone.
Yeah.
Spotify's already fired half of the people that
and that's the funny thing about this, isn't it? So the Warner Communications, just to beat that one to death, then sold Atari and lost money on it because the video game market crashed.
Timing is hard.
I want to say 5 years later.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
It's hard.
Yep.
All right, let's take a break, come back. It is called Windows Weekly, so we do have some Windows news. Yes, coming up.
We do.
Just a bit.
Yes, we do.
It's about Microsoft, and this is a huge story, so I'm glad we spent some time with it. Our show today brought to you by AWS Insiders. It's a podcast, and it's a great podcast. A fast-paced, entertaining, insightful look behind the scenes of Amazon Web Services, AWS, and cloud computing in general. It's not your typical Talking Heads podcast like we do. Oh, no, it's much better. Much, much better. It's a high production value, high energy, high entertainment show full of captivating stories from the earliest days of AWS to today and beyond. Hosts Rahul Subramaniam and Hillary Doyle dig into the current state and the future of AWS by talking with the people and the companies that know it best. Rahul is a veteran AWS pro with over 15 years of experience managing more than 45,000 AWS instances, so he knows what he's talking about. In fact, he's very well known for pushing AWS products to their limits and for believing AWS is truly the operating system of the future. AWS Insiders is a show that's full of opinions, takeaways, and untold stories about the challenges, innovations, and the mind-blowing promise of cloud computing. Brand new season just came out. Some good stuff in there. The first episode was great, filling the cloud talent gap. I was fascinated by episode 2, I guess 3 of the new season. It was the third one, right? Yeah, it's the one about Moderna, right? Moderna, creators of the one of the mRNA vaccines that pretty much saved us a couple of years ago, was a big user of AWS and the cloud. So Rahul and Hillary talked to Moderna's director of data engineering and cloud architecture to talk about that intersection. I think that's fascinating. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player or visit cloudfix.aurea.com/podcast. cloudfix.aurea.com/podcast. We'll also include a link in our show notes at twit.tv/WW. You can just click that link. And our thanks to AWS Insiders for their support. All right, we're back. Paul Thurrott, Richard Campbell, and there is Windows news.
Actually, before we get to, this is just a semi-personal thing, but AdDuplex announced last week that they were shutting down. And so I know the guy who runs the company, and Ellen, he's from, he has a tough international name, so I'm probably not pronouncing this right. I always have to apologize, but Menendovich. He has served, I think, an incredible role in first the Windows Phone community and then in Windows.
Oh, you used their numbers for years. I remember now. The name was familiar.
And when this happened, when this happened, I wrote, I have been using their survey data to report on the relative usage shares of back in the day, Windows Phone versions, Windows Phone device versions, Windows versions, Surface PCs, forever. And then I looked it up, and literally since January 2015, sorry, when we started Thurrott.com, that first week I had a story based on their data. And I've enjoyed that. He's done some interesting contributions outside the space explicitly.
What was their business originally? AdDuplex sounds like they're an ad agency.
It was a way for ads to get into apps, right? And so it was Windows Phone apps, and then eventually became the Metro style apps that kind of built off of that for big Windows, right? And that kind of business has fallen in recent years. So
Alan never got merged in with the big players,
right?
They never.
Yeah,
that's
he's Lithuanian. Alan Mendelovich.
You guys are terrible. Mendelovich. It's easy.
Mendelovich,
just like it's spelled. Mendelovich.
No, I'm terrible at that kind of stuff thing. I can barely say Bob. Anyway, he's a really good guy, and I hope he lands on his feet. And I'm sure he will. I always found that data to be incredibly useful and relent.
And he jumped into Windows Phone right at the beginning.
Yeah,
and there was his mistake, obviously.
But sometimes you take a big bet and it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Hey, I jumped into podcast early.
Oh, it worked. Come on, it worked out. Come on, come on. I know you're scrapping by, but you have a roof over your head.
This whole podcasting thing is never going to.
It's never going to take off.
It's a fad.
No, I love them. Actually, I love the medium, and which is good because at this point, that's the only reason I'm still doing it is because I love it.
Yeah.
But I think the medium will survive. Our downturn. His mistake, I guess, was tying so tightly to Windows Mobile. Was he able to transition over to Android?
He went to gaming. Yeah.
Gaming, okay.
He
was in a niche. He was in a very narrow niche.
You play to your strength, and look, you could be a player in a small market and still do very well.
Oh
right?
no, that's the find a need and fill it. Right, that's the key.
Yep.
That's always the best way to do a business.
His primary business was not anything I was involved with. It was just that he used the information they gathered for good, for very useful purpose. It was, all these arguments, well, this doesn't represent, a lot of corporate machines, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. No, I hear you. But it's fascinating to see the relative size of it most recently, like Windows 10 versions versus Windows 11 versions out in the world is how I would describe it. Normal. It's like any survey. No, it doesn't necessarily represent every single person. We get it. But I thought it was a representative slice, and it was always a good number of PCs or devices, right?
It's funny because I got the email today from Adobe, of all people, to tell me how big sales were on Amazon Prime Day yesterday. And it's always funny that Adobe is the one that's doing those numbers. By the way,
right? We have all these market researchers out in the world, and Adobe is. I think the same thing when I get this. Yeah. Why is Amazon not talking about this?
Well, I don't know if they want to. I should mention it was the biggest Prime Day ever. In 24 hours, 6.4 billion with a B in sales.
What were they described as? By the Register, Amazon?
The small boutique.
The boutique.
A small internet boutique. They're not big. 6.4 billion in one freaking day. And of course, today is day 2, and I have a feeling it'll be similar.
It's also not a bad result for what is essentially inventory dumping,
Right. Right. I bought razor blades, right? I said, look. The Mach 3s are down to $161. That's a deal, and I bought them.
Yeah,
sure. I'm sure they're dumping it because it's an older blade. But
whatever, you need it. It's fine. It's a win-win.
Yeah. And look
You could be okay with that.
Shaven, I am.
I'm glad you're going to be able to shave again. You're looking a little rough.
No, it's weird because I'm thinking, because I've tried a lot of different single blade. I wanted to go back to the old fashioned, single blade. Sure. You put in the thing and you screw the bottom, and it cut my face up.
Classic.
The classic, right? But they're recyclable. Sure. They're not plastic. There's no plastic. All this stuff.
Get that single blade thing. You could probably just sharpen that and use it forever.
Terrible shave. It's awful.
Yeah, of course.
So I went to the wire cutter. And they said, we've tested them all. This is the best one, is the Mach 3. And so that's why.
Hilariously, that is what I use.
Yeah.
After trying Harry's and all the other things.
They were an advertiser, Schaller Dave Club, all of those. By the way, I hope Schaller Dave isn't retiring anytime soon. And, I'm
also glad that the women's razor Venus was not the top choice, because I would feel weird using that. But,
little pink thing.
Yeah.
It's funny, though, manufactured by what? The biggest,
of course,
consumer product company in the world.
Gillette.
Yeah. Yep. So there you go. Sometimes the biggest is the best.
Gillette is a good example of the Xbox model, right? We're going to lose money on the razor, but make money on the blades.
Yeah, that's why I bought it.
That's where they make all their money. Those things are so expensive. If you go to CVS, they're under lock and key.
Yeah, they lock them up.
Yeah. We're talking about razor blades here.
And by the way, Gillette is owned by P&G. I mean, they're a P&G company. Yeah. So it is a big,
there's always a bigger fish.
Big conglomerate. Right? There's always a bigger fish. Let me write that down. That's good. Did you just make that?
Just you heard it here first.
Good. Wow. Yeah. All right, Windows.
On Tuesday, yesterday, this is going to be the sarcastic headline. Microsoft released Moment 3 for the fourth time. We've kind of gone back and forth over this. A little confusing.
That's hysterical.
I know.
That's a lot of moments.
Yep. I would say, I think it's fair to say that Microsoft's release schedule, well, they act like it's totally transparent and obvious to everyone, has been very muddled and weird. And my understanding
as we've explained over months.
Yeah. Yep. So this is the second, I will call it, public /stable release of Moment 3, and the fourth overall because of the preview releases that preceded them. I guess we'll put it this way. It's the complete version of Moment 3 as much as it can be. Although, Microsoft, right? So many times after a moment, some key feature actually gets released on some future Tuesday.
And when you make that a Moment 4, or is it really going to make a Moment 3.1?
So I wonder, given the timing, because these are basically quarterly, if Moment 4 go forward in time is what, October?
Right.
Maybe Moment 4 equates to 23H2.
Yeah, you must be getting close.
Maybe. And tied to that, by the way, is this news today that there is a new Canary build. And now Canary is the one I've sort of said, no, I've explicitly said, maybe this is 12. And here's the interesting thing. They actually switched the way that the build branch that it's in from, let's see if I can get it over, from RS pre-release to ZN release, which means this is not Windows 12 yet, right?
Right.
Unless Windows 12 is going to come out this fall somehow.
Seems unlikely.
Yeah, it just seems extremely unlikely.
I would think 2024.
I would bet money on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I only mentioned that because, my understanding of how they release things is obviously just, all I can do is pick at the little bits of data they provide and guess, I guess.
Well, and clearly all of this is in flux. Like they're playing with how do we do updates?
100%. And
your instinct on Canary was interesting because it's, logically every new feature show up in Canary first.
Right.
And then into the insider.
You said this a few times, and I will tell you that when I read the Microsoft blog post, and let me just go look at it. It says,
this is the Patch Tuesday update.
No, it's the dev thing. So why can't I find it? God, I can't find anything. That's why. Oh, here we go. So under what's new in this build, this is a Canary build, right? This is to your point, this is where features should appear first. The first thing that's new are the addition of new features from the dev channel. And I read that and I thought,
what?
Richard. No, I thought, Richard, This is the point he keeps making. New features should appear first in Canary. But this build adds several features that appeared first in Dev.
Right.
Dev drive, backup and restore improvements, dynamic lighting, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, one would argue maybe that's still because it's 12 and now it's validated itself in 11. And so they're like, okay, we'll take that.
That's exactly right. So if you are going to introduce new features into Windows 11 today and you intend to release Windows 12 whenever, Windows 12 will include those features, right? They're obviously passed through. So that could be. Could I argue that maybe that supports my contention that this is...
It doesn't stop. Like now the Venn diagram gets interesting.
Yeah. But whatever. You know what? The
point is those 4 steps, they're not in order. They're just not.
That's right. And
one of them is a branch.
That's right. And all we can do is speculate. We could speculate all day long. I do. I've turned it into a career, unfortunately. Whatever. But anyway, so Moment 3 is out. So if you're on Windows 11.
And when you say out, you mean again.
I do very much mean that. You will be getting it. It will come to you through Windows Update, whether you want it or not. If you are on Windows 11 21 H2, that version of Windows 11 will exit support in October, right? Tied to the 2-year anniversary. So that's an interesting conundrum for some people, because I've heard from several people who are like, look, obviously I want to be on the latest version. It won't give it to me, and so that will be interesting as that gets closer. And I just kind of vaguely, and anyone all of us has been around a long time, I think so we'll all appreciate this, is this notion of, Windows versions and support time life cycles, and how we've gone from this 10-year thing to this very vague thing in Windows 10 where it was like, this will be supported for the lifetime of the hardware. And it's like, what does that even mean? I don't think they understood what it meant. They were making it up as they went along. To Windows 11, where they talk about this thing that is continuous innovation, which is really the issue around Moment 3 and everything else, which is they can just update this thing at any time they feel like it, and they have. It's an interesting thing that a major Windows like 1.0 version of a Windows release is only supported for 2 years.
Yeah, but it would also fit with what we're seeing in Dev. What you're seeing in Office, like versions don't persist anymore. They are constantly updated, and occasionally numbers are declared.
To me, there was a very clean and good goal to get us down to the fewest possible Windows versions. It was good from a support perspective because Microsoft really only needed to release X number of patches, right?
I mean, staying with 10 and just using the 4-digit numbers didn't make life any better. You made a lot of versions of Windows.
No, and that's why it changed again, I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the irony of Windows 10 was that there were at one point more versions of Windows in market supported than at any time in Microsoft's history, and that was the exact opposite.
Oh no, and sysadmins were just ripping their hair out. Right? Like it was not an easy time.
Yeah. So I absolutely, this system is set up so that we stop thinking a little bit about major releases, maybe, and we have all these other things going on all the time. And I get that, but it makes the Windows Insider program very confusing.
Yeah, as usual.
Yeah, and the illogical nature of features appearing on a lower step of the scale, is always frustrating for whatever reason. But
it's just I think your nose is correct that Canary is a branch. It's an offside thing. Yeah, unless we'll see. The only way we'll know more is the next time.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose it doesn't make sense, but. Maybe Canary. I can't even talk to this. You know what? It doesn't matter. It's not even worth speculating. Unfortunately, everything I say on this topic has to be speculation. It's really easy to fall in this rabbit hole. It's not worth it.
It's wonderfully conspiratorial.
Yes, I really try hard not to be that guy.
Yeah.
Microsoft has turned me into a monster, so I'm sorry. Anyway, so Moment 3 is out. New Canary build has some stuff from Dev. The most interesting thing for people, if they care about this stuff, and you should, you're listening to this podcast, is back at Build, Microsoft talked about bringing AI to the Microsoft Store, and in two major ways. One was going to be using AI to summarize reviews, which I think is a great idea. I talked about how Google does that in Google Maps. If you look at reviews, they'll pull out quotes, key quotes that kind of capture the essence of a destination, right? Mm-hmm. This place has the best fried hoagies I've ever had, or whatever. I think that stuff's smart. And the other one is something I don't quite understand, which is this notion of bringing an AI hub to the Microsoft Store where you can find AI apps in a specific part of the store. And that's what's available in this new Canary build.
Well, yeah, especially when you realize AI is just a pair of letters you can attach to virtually everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
right. This is Windows Weekly, now powered by AI.
Yes, AI fart, no problem. Right.
Yeah,
that's good.
So we'll see. We'll see how that evolves. But I have a feeling, like the Copilot that we talked about last week in Windows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, sounds like a good idea. What you always learn more about things over time. I've been talking to Raphael about this thing. I couldn't get this. I did all the tricks that I talked about to get this thing to install, but on a fourth computer,
right.
And I could not get the Copilot to appear. So I went to Raph and I was like, because he's the one who uncovered how you do this in the first place. I said, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. I've done this. I have done this exactly right. It worked on 3 other computers. And he said, did you update Microsoft Edge? What are you talking about? No. What? Why?
Why would I need to?
Because it's an instance of Microsoft Edge. And I said, oh, okay. And so I did, and it updated, and the second that Edge updated and reboots, that icon appeared in the taskbar.
Right.
It literally appeared, and it had an animation. It actually flew in from the bottom and kind of bounced a little bit. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so in the same way that this is the Copilot. So Copilot, what you come to understand is an instance of Microsoft Edge. So we have found yet another way for you to use Edge, even if you've chosen another browser. You can now use Edge unknowingly side by side with Chrome or whatever your favorite browser is, right?
Right.
Is really just a wrapper to a bunch of crap up on Bing. That's all it is. With a little bit of information about a couple of Windows features. It's really not much. And that kind of, it's like a wah. And I think there's an even better possibility that whatever this AI stuff in Microsoft Store is going to be the same thing. It's like, seriously? It's just a curated list of apps. It's the Yahoo of AI. Is that what we're looking at here?
Yahoo of AI.
Right?
It's brilliant.
Anyway, yeah. So I love Windows. You wouldn't know it from the way I was talking for the past 10 minutes. But
it's always the question is, Windows love you back, right?
I have to say, it's felt like a one-way relationship for a while. That's for sure. And speaking of one way, Amazon announced, which I found kind of amusing, that the Amazon App Store on Windows 11 is now generally available. Now, the way they phrased it was for developers.
Right.
I've had people come to me and say, I feel like this has been out for a while. To which I would say, I feel like it's been in preview for a while.
Yeah.
So back in, speaking of things Microsoft says and things go differently, when Microsoft announced Windows 11 version 22H2, they actually, let me go back. I'm sorry, it was further than that. When Microsoft announced Windows 11, one of the key features, in fact, I would argue it was one of the marquee top 3 features, right, was Android app compatibility.
Right.
Then Windows 11 shipped in October that year, 2021, not 2022. It was nowhere to be seen. It arrived in preview form in February 2022, only in the United States. This is 18 months ago. And it's kind of been in preview ever since. And so when 22H2 came out last October, so 2022, Microsoft announced, you can look it up, folks. They said this out loud. There were over 50,000 apps in the Amazon App Store for Android. I looked at this thing repeatedly. And by the time I wrote the Android apps chapter for the Windows 11 field guide, I think in March or April of this year, there were approximately 57 apps, something like that. It was a very small number of apps.
Close.
You could count them. You could
couple
count
of
them.
zeros.
Yep. But back in October, Microsoft said there were 50,000.
Wow.
So when Amazon announced that this was generally available, of course, I installed it on whatever PC I was using at the time. And it doesn't have the preview moniker anymore. So fair enough.
Progress.
And there's a lot of apps in the store. In fact, I can't count. I can't say it's 50,000. You can't scroll that long. I mean, it can't. Who could count like that? But I'd say finally this thing has a ton of apps for absolutely. So they finally met this promise of 18 months ago. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's 9 months ago, whatever that was. Here's the thing. So if there are 50,000 apps, there are maybe 7 or 8 that are any good. And I don't mean 7 or 8,000. I mean 7 or 8.
Right.
Like I challenge you to go look at this list if you could find it anywhere. It's a bunch of crap. And I don't know if it's Amazon's fault. I don't know where to put the blame, but I feel like Microsoft has done a good job with virtualizing Android through the Windows subsystem for Android. And it's clear that this thing would fly if we could somehow get Google in there officially.
Right.
And there are obviously side loading workaround type things. And I'm probably going to look into this soon because it's a little frustrating. But I think the idea of Android apps on Windows makes as much sense as Android apps on Chromebooks, right? That there are certain apps that are just not coming to Windows, right? And this is good. It's kind of win-win, right? From a developer's perspective, you should. They all won't, but you should make some small changes so it works with big screens and yada yada yada, keyboard, mouse, whatever it is. I think that Amazon is trying to ensure that that's happening, and that's maybe what took so long on the 50,000 apps, whatever.
Right.
But
now, have you been using PhoneLink?
Yeah, well, on and off, and again for the book. And your PhoneLink. Well, first of all, why are you asking me?
Just because, in terms of for consumers getting access to Android apps on your PC, PhoneLink's a hell of a solution. Okay,
so this is the problem. So PhoneLink, there are 3 tiers of PhoneLink.
Right.
Right. There's PhoneLink on the iPhone, which is garbage. There's PhoneLink
which
for
is the
Android
one I use. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
It doesn't do as much. Android really, it needs Android.
It doesn't do almost anything.
Yeah.
But at least it installs quick. If you use Android, non-Samsung Android, you get a pretty good experience. There's actually, a dozen or so functions, and it does all the big stuff you want. Your recent photos are there, phone calls and text messages, in both directions. Phone notifications, you get access to the media on your phone, which you can play through the app, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff. If you have a Samsung, recent Samsung flagship, you get additional functionality, including the ability to virtualize the entire operating system in a single window that looks like a phone, or individual apps, which is really cool. And this is another way to get a single Android app on your computer. And in that case, this is a Google app, right? Of course, you're streaming it from your phone. So your phone has to be right there. We could talk about lag, latency, whatever, but it's, that's good. The problem is that's a small subset. Well, maybe it's not small. It's a subset of the overall audience, right?
Right.
If we just pretend 50-50 iPhone, Android, okay, this 50%'s gone. And then Samsung does dominate, the Android market. I don't know what their percentage is for usage share, but that's overall. The reason Samsung's in number one is because of all their A series phones, right? So there's a limited market for Samsung flagships. So it may only be 20 or 15%. I'm just making up numbers, but of the number of people who could use PhoneLink and access their phone will get the full experience, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's a tiered experience. If we could bring, I guess emulated, virtualized, I guess it's technically virtualization, the subsystem, and then you would run the apps on the computer. So what do you call that? I guess it's a real app running in a virtual environment, and it was Google apps, right? I think that'd be great. There are some apps that developers are just never going to bring to Windows, like I said.
Yep.
And there are, I think there's a neat use case for little utility apps. They don't have to look like a Windows app, right? They can be like a little phone app. There's nothing wrong with that.
Do I install these from the Windows Store, or do I have to download the Android App Store to do that?
No, you have to download the Android App Store, and then you have to install the apps from that store.
Okay.
And then, interestingly, you also have to update them from that store, which makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just that the experience is completely different from that of the Microsoft Store. So with the Microsoft Store, when you install apps from there, this happens seamlessly. Like, you can go and check for app updates, but you'll just get them. No one ever pops up anything that says, hey, there's a new version. Well, that's not it. Okay. Single digit percentage of the time, for some reason, they might say, hey, there's a new version of this app. Like, if you run an app, they'll say, look, you got to get the new version. Like, that might happen. But for the most part, we're not talking dialog boxes and stuff. The Android App Store,
it's the Kindle. I mean, the Amazon App Store, really, right? It's this one.
Mm-hmm. So if you look, I can't see exactly what you have there, but if you click on the Kindle app, for example, what it should do is bring up the Amazon App Store entry in the store, because you have to install that first.
Right.
Yeah.
But the store itself is the Amazon App Store.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm in the Microsoft store, but that I install the Amazon App Store to get this store.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm talking about it.
Scenario. Yes.
People, you probably heard of this thing called Threads that Meta launched a week ago.
What is that?
No, never heard of it. No.
Is it like a sewing app?
Me and 100 million of my friends.
Yeah, close personal friend. So there is no desktop application for it. But
That's
the
right.
workaround is to use the Android app on Windows.
Yeah.
Right. So
how do you do that?
Well, I'm looking to see, but I've seen people say they do that. It's not. Is it not in the Android App Store?
Pretty sure it's not. I don't know that for a fact.
I'm going to look. I'm installing it right now.
I suspect it's just going to be a side loading situation.
Maybe that's what.
By the way, I whatever anyone thinks of Threads, the thing to understand about this app is that it's terrible and Mark Zuckerberg needs to go to hell. No, it's that
it's actually pretty
it's
great.
incomplete.
It's pretty great.
No,
I love it.
It's fine. It's fine. It's in an incomplete. It's in a Windows 11 state. So eventually there will be a full featured web version of that will serve onto the desktop or perhaps desktop versions. But
yeah, they say they're going to do that, but it's
it's early days.
It's early days. Yeah.
Anyway, the point
are you on
earlier,
Threads, by the way?
Yep, I am.
Yeah,
same as on Instagram. Thread.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard, what are you on Threads?
Rich Campbell.
Okay.
It's just that you'll find if you install a bunch of Android apps via the store, it's going to get a little chatty. You get it keeps asking you, "Hey, did you want to update this app? Hey, do you want to update this?" It's like it's such a different experience from the Microsoft Store. It's a little off-putting to me. But the big problem, of course, is Google. So
will it update by itself, or do you have to manually do that each time?
So you know what? It's possible since this general availability release came out that they've changed it. But when I wrote about it for the book back in March, you couldn't do anything to stop it from doing this. That I found.
Mm-hmm.
I found it to be very chatty in a bad way.
Presumably it'll get better.
This is not this is a non-trivial install I'm finding because you have to install the Windows subsystem for Android as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking a while.
And actually, you also, if you weren't prompted for it, you already did it. But you also have to install a Windows virtualization component.
Wow.
Optional feature, and that requires a reboot.
Okay, well, I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it will happen.
You want to talk about Edge?
Let's pause for a moment. We'll talk about Edge in just a moment. But first, I would like, if you don't mind, to mention a fine sponsor. And all our sponsors are super fine. But this is super, super fine. You may not think to look at me that I make my own bed. But I do. In fact, this very morning, I was very happy because I put on my Brook linen sheets. Oh, I love the Brook linen. We're going to have to get more, though, because, I only have one set. And so I alternate it with another company's, and it's just not the same. Brook linen. Oh, sleeping during the summer, especially when it's hot. We're having a heat wave right now. Can be difficult, to say the least. Whether you're trying to nap after fun in the sun or you're just struggling to stay cool at night, Brook Linen's award-winning bedding is here to help. It's so nice. Brook Linen's mission is to provide you with hotel-quality luxury bedding delivered to your door directly to you at a fair price. And I mean this. I've not found such great sheets for such low price ever before. I'm kind of a sheet aficionado, if you didn't know. Founded by husband and wife duo Rich and Vicky in, guess where, Brooklyn in 2014. Brook Linen, get it? Brook Linen has everything you need to live your most comfortable life. Easily upgrade your home with quality products, curated designs that'll leave your guests swooning. Oh, I love your curated designs. Brook Linen has been making dream spaces a reality for almost a decade, so they're the obvious choice when making your house a home. And by the way, I didn't get these, and now I need to get another set, so I might do this. Brook Linen has an organic collection as well. Brook Linen, the internet's favorite sheets. And while I'll admit there's no such thing as the perfect sleep, there is the perfect fabric for every kind of sleeper. Micah went for the crisp classic percale weave, or do what I did, and I am very happy, buy their best-selling buttery smooth Luxe sateen sheets. Oh, they feel so good. Build your own indoor oasis to escape the heat. The options are endless. There is no better feeling to slide under those cool, crisp, beautiful sheets. At the end of the day, do yourself the favor of simplifying your shopping by bundling. That's what we did. We got the sheets in white, but Lisa went crazy. We got the towels, beautiful, absorbent, nice bath towels in bright red. And I kind of like it. It's easy for me to find my good towels. That's why I'm glad about that. You'll save 25% when you bundle your new favorite home essentials. Wirecutter, Good Housekeeping, both awarded Brooklinen for their outstanding bedding. They have over 100,000 5-star customer reviews. One reviewer said, I seem to get that wonderful sleeping temperature very quickly and stay there throughout the night versus with my old cotton sheet sets. Another said, best sheets in the world like butter. That might be me. I might have been the one that says that. Brooklinen uses only the highest quality materials for all of their products, such as long staple cotton, so everything they create is built to last. Shop in-store. Yes, there are Brooklinen stores, but you can also do it online. That's how we did it at brooklinen.com. Give yourself the cooling sleep you deserve this summer. If you use the offer code WINDOWS, you get $20 off your online purchase of $100 or more, plus free shipping. Brooklinen.com, BROOKLINEN. Get it? Brooklinen.com. Promo code again, Windows, $20 off on orders of $100 plus with free shipping. I love these sheets. Could not recommend them more highly. They are fantastic. Brooklinen. Don't forget the offer code WINDOWS, by the way. Very important. We thank them for their support. Now, this time, it's only Richard. Oh, no, Paul just came back. There he is.
I mute myself and turn off the camera, but what you missed was me laughing out loud when you said, I know I don't look like the kind of guy who makes his own bed.
I look like the kind of guy who might have a butler. Jeeves, the bed, make it. No. Was Admiral Macquarie who said you should make your bed every morning?
Right.
First thing when you get up, he says, because then that way you'll have accomplished something. And he says, you then have this sense of accomplishment going into the day. And I thought, well, that's clever. And I tried it, and he's right. It's like you just, it's a good way to start. It's like you've done something.
Yeah. You feel productive.
Of order.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I was going to say that sounds like a low bar on accomplishments, but okay.
Well, it is. That's why it's great, because it's an easy thing to do. It takes a minute.
Yep.
But I just thought it was good.
I make a cup of coffee in the morning. Does that qualify?
No, that does not qualify. It does not qualify. It was Navy SEAL and Admiral who said this in 2014 at a commencement. Admiral McRaven at the University of Texas, Austin. I'll play it for you?
To me, basic SEAL training was a lifetime of challenges.
He's a SEAL.
Crammed into 6 months. So here are the 10 lessons I learned from basic SEAL training that hopefully will be of value to you as you move forward in life. Every morning in SEAL training, my instructors, who at the time were all Vietnam veterans, would show up in my barracks room, and the first thing they'd do is inspect my bed. If you did it right, the corners would be square, the covers would be pulled tight, the pillow centered just under the headboard, and the extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the rack.
I do not do it right.
It was a simple task.
Yeah.
Mundane at best, but every morning we were required to make our bed to perfection. It seemed a little ridiculous at the time, particularly in light of the fact that we were aspiring to be real warriors, tough, battle-hardened SEALs. But the wisdom of this simple act has been proven to me many times over.
So,
if you make your bed every morning,
there's more.
You will have accomplished the first task of the day.
It
will give you a small sense of pride. And it will encourage you to do another task, and another,
and another,
and another,
and another.
And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed.
See?
Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter.
Thank you, Admiral McRaven.
Leo, I've been married for 33 years, and every single time we change the sheet on the beds.
Yes.
The bed. My wife stands on one side, I stand on the other.
Yes.
And we pull the sheet up. She never pulls it up all the way. And I always say, Stephanie, it's got to be even. And then I say, then she starts going to the back of the, I'm like, where are you going? I said, how long is it overhanging on this side? And she says, whatever number of inches, because it has to match.
That's why you should do it yourself, by yourself.
I just had this interaction yesterday.
This is the OCD way.
This has never been fixed. Well,
I don't want it to be a source of marital strife. Maybe you should just
I agree that this needs to be done correctly.
You do hospital corners, Paul?
Oh, well, no. I mean, I'm not that good.
You're not that crazy.
Listen, I want it to be, the sheet needs to be at the right height. It needs to be even across the bed, and their overhang has to be identical on both sides. It's a reasonable standard.
It's
a reasonable standard.
Well, Lisa and I disagree only on one thing, and usually I just make the bed, and that way there's no disagreement.
Yeah.
But I like to, you have the sheet, my beautiful Brooklinen sheet, and then you have the blanket over that. I like to fold the sheet over the top of the blanket.
Oh.
Nice, crisp fold.
That's fancy.
Fancy. Just a little bit under the pillows, and then the bedspread over the top of that, and I tuck the bedspread
I'm not going to waste your time to explain why I don't do that, because I have a very explicit reason. But I will say, this guy that just spoke, the difference between him and us is that he was working with a cot. You can very easily reach from both sides.
It's a lot easier.
Bed. If you had to meet my standard and go to both sides of the bed to match the distance that this thing was, this would take forever.
And
actually,
by the way,
it still takes forever because my wife still doesn't listen to me. But you got the idea.
All of this, a perfect example of how little Paul wants to talk about Microsoft Edge.
So no, look, I'll throw the dog a bone here. I complain a lot about Edge. But this is a good feature, and they just added it. It's not tied to anything. It's not coming in some future release or whatever. But Microsoft has rolled out spam notification blocking. Right? Spam notifications are those things that often pop up from sites you've just visited for the first time. They're spammy. They pretend that you have a virus when you don't. That kind of thing. Right. And so they're actually blocking this. They're using. Back in the day, we would have called this heuristics, right? I'm sure these days they're going to call it AI.
Artificial intelligence, yes, definitely.
Yeah, of course. But they are going after this in a way that I think makes sense. They're also removing notification privileges from websites that do send spammy notifications. So in a way, they're probably creating a block list, rather, that Edge will use globally. So if we know that this site is junky and is doing bad things, we won't let them even pop this thing up.
Well, and most of the messages I get are about me renewing my Office 365 account and changing the password and so forth. Okay.
So all right. See,
Gmail addresses.
Okay. I was totally going to try to be positive about it, but now that you've said that, I will say the cynical part of me says this will do nothing to stop the rampant pop-ups in Windows 11 that have nothing to do with anything and are for products or services I'm already using.
Right.
Whatever.
And don't generate an icon on the taskbar. Don't and don't have an entry in the task manager. They're just mysterious. Oh, and they're not listening to my mute all sound settings. And
please don't get started. So as Windows,
not frustrated at all. I feel real good.
It's funny. It's not funny at all. I don't know why I said that. Back in the late 90s and then I guess early 2000s as well, Microsoft was working to integrate Internet Explorer ever further into Windows. Mm-hmm. There was a Windows 98 release. I don't know if it was the first one or the second one that was literally going to replace the shell with IE.
Yep. And
all of the links were going to be single clicks with with the blue underline, just like you see in the web. There was the active desktop stuff, of course, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. They really stepped back from that, of course. And of course, there were antitrust issues as well.
Yes. But part of me wonders they were doing all that just to show, it's not antitrust. This is how the software works.
100% they were. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is totally integrated. It's not a separate product. Yeah. 100%. But if you think about what's happening in Windows 11, right, where Edge comes up, whether you want it or not, Edge will come up when you look at widgets. Edge will come up and start search highlights. Mm-hmm. Edge is now behind this feature everyone seems to want, Windows Copilot.
Right.
It's Edge.
Edge.
You could argue, and I've just invented this on the spot, so maybe I'm arguing that maybe Microsoft is once again going down this, now it's Edge, but web browser integration strategy again, that
everything is Edge.
Well, more and more is Edge. Yeah. I mean, more and more of Windows is being subsumed by Edge. And that's a choice of two evils right there. I don't know. Anyway, it is kind of interesting. Anyway, Absolutely. This new feature is great. I don't want to jump on it. Yeah. It's a good idea. And
You're excited about it.
Well, excited is I don't get excited, Richard, but it's but it's good. Yeah.
I am unhappy about the NUC.
I am too.
Yeah. I know.
So I've owned this is the Intel small form factor computer. I've owned 3 of them. Mm-hmm. I owned a 6th gen, 8th gen, and 10th gen. The 10th gen by far was my favorite. It was, perfect.
Great little machine.
Leo will remember this because I'm sure I talked about it at the time, but some 3 years ago or something, My house got struck by lightning. Actually, the lawn in front of my house, 12 feet away from, got struck by lightning. I was standing there on the porch when it happened. I thought the world had ended. It was a nuclear attack. It was the loudest, brightest white thing that I've ever seen in my life. And we in the new house, the previous house, we did not have a whole house surge protector like we did in Dedham. And we lost our Sonos soundbar. We lost various electronics. But one of the things that went down was the NUC. And I did everything I could to bring that thing back. And it's the worst.
No.
Anyway, unfortunately, so the way I learned about this story is I saw a headline that said Intel is exiting the PC business. And I went, what? Because, of course, you hear that and you think,
oh, wow.
This, right? I mean, where does your mind go?
What?
Processors, yeah.
Intel's presence in the PC market was smaller than Microsoft's. So to kind of put that in perspective. So the NUC, it was not a big seller, but it was an excellent line of mini computers. They had standard kind of productivity models that were basically a laptop in a box, right, from a component perspective. They came in kit form and full form where you could add your own RAM and storage. They were expandable. There were gaming class computers.
Was it originally designed as a reference design? Because plenty of other people make these now. And we'll probably continue to make them, right?
I really don't know. I mean, with Surface, I felt like there was this explicit kind of discussion about why we're doing this, and I don't know that
the reference design mantra.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
you never get good instructions like that from Intel at the best of times.
Yeah, I love these products. I feel bad about this.
One literally sitting behind me here, upstairs.
And I have this Meerkat from System 76, which is a Linux NUC. But it's not a NUC. I mean, it's the same
it's a small form
thing.
Form factor computer. Yeah.
Same size. And I'm sure they'll continue to sell it just because Intel isn't, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the comment section for the article I wrote about this, a bunch of people have kind of chimed in with, well, there's this other thing that's good too. And that's cute. You know,
there are other ones.
The thing I liked about it though, was it came from Intel. And we don't do this a lot anymore, but for a long time, if you had an Intel based PC, one of the bits of advice is you should get their installer updater for all of the hardware components in your computer. So it's kind of separate from Windows Update, but it's you want it from the maker, you know, and that was how you updated that thing. And I always thought that was pretty great, you know. So it was whether they intended it to be a reference design or not, it was a computer made by the company that makes all the chipsets in there. And it was you kind of had that implicit understanding, like we're going to get the best drivers and, all that kind of stuff.
Back in the Strange Loop days, when I was mostly teaching scaling websites, I took 6 of them and put them in a rollaway bag with all the networking gear. So I could basically carry, a load balanceable web server and test rig.
Sure.
I called it secondary inspection because that's what the TSA called it.
Yeah. So I did a Microsoft Mobility Roadshow where I traveled with not a dozen devices, but I bet it was 10 or 11. Yeah. And I brought them in a big army knapsack thing, whatever you call it, a duffel bag. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget going through security on the first day because I took off from Providence and then went around the country and then came back. But the thing went through security. You could see it go, vroom, vroom. The guy looks up at me and he looks down and he's like, come here. He goes,
what the hell is that?
He unzips the bag and he goes, all right, why do you have so many computers? I'm like, I need the battery life.
So I learned there was no way to take that bag apart that wouldn't get secondary inspected at all. So I just leave it together, right? You put your clothes through first, your regular lap through second, you put this thing through last. And then
you just know.
Yeah, you can see the reaction on the guy's face when he goes, wah! It's like, okay, you see my bag. Now we know what's going to happen.
It looks like a bunch of cluster bombs, like.
But my rule has always been be excited to show them what's in the bag. Like, wait until you see this bag. It's the best bag ever. That wears them out fast. All right. You know what bad guys aren't? Excited to show you their stuff.
Good point. Yeah. You're like not putting your hat down a little lower as you go through.
Nope. That's bad. Those are the good old days. But miss you, Nuck.
Yeah. Too bad.
It was a great idea.
Yeah.
And the name wasn't great.
No, the name wasn't great. And then you find out what it means. You're like, what?
The new unit of computing. I mean, what does that mean? Yeah.
It's like, guys, what are you doing? But it was, whatever. You know what? They were beautiful little computers. I really liked them. So
the classic implementation of them is sized for a 100 mil Visa mount. So you literally bolted it on the back of the monitor.
On the back of the monitor. Exactly. Beautiful.
Perfect.
And that's what it felt like, a next unit of compute, right? That it was just part of the screen.
Right. That's exactly
the average consumer points at the screen and calls it a computer anyway. So you might as well put it there.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
There are alternatives, So whatever.
There are plenty of third-party implementations.
So I'm curious your take on this, Richard. I thought someone was joking when they told me about this on Twitter. And Microsoft is renaming Azure AD standing for Active Directory, which a little bit of a naming confusion to that too. But anyway, to Entra ID, Entra being a new family of, I don't know, like security monitoring, network monitoring, and identity services, right? I guess that would be the way to put it.
Well,
so you're old school. You've been around.
I'm old school. I've been aware of this name for a while. They're finally making more noise about it. I would also speak to Conway's Law. That systems tend to reflect the teams that are building it. There is clearly a reorganization inside of Microsoft around security. And by the way, there needs to be. And so, I mean, they're leading with AAD for no other reason than that's something that people know and use. So they have to pay attention to this. Otherwise, you wouldn't. Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit like the worries over artisan game makers or whatever, with, it's the past is going away, right?
Which is not true. This is bundling products, the products that people are using into a tighter bundle to make it a little easier to use.
Well, so for example, Active Directory debuted, as you know, in Windows 2000, but one of the goofy historical facts of Windows 2000 is that it was powered by NT technology, right? That was how they said goodbye to the past, right? So, Entra ID powered by Azure AD technology. It's like, oh boy, we're saying goodbye to the past.
Yeah. At the same time, the other identity products that Azure's had, the B2C products and so forth, have not done well and have problems. So that Conway's Law reference is saying, hey, you've been trying to straighten out identity for a while. It looks like there's a new team that are going to work on this again. And so the rebundling is about showing ownership, that anybody worried about anything identity related goes to this one place. Why they have to keep creating new random 5-letter names, I don't know. I mean, I would only say, you know what I'd say in favor of Entra? At least it's not Fabric. Right. Like now you're using a name that you already have a product called, but now it's something completely else. Like the upside to making a new name is at least it doesn't confuse you that it's something else.
Fair enough. Yes, I guess.
Yeah. So it's mostly on the AAD side. Yeah. It's just a bunch of renaming but the reality, of course, is Microsoft has had a serious identity problem that has everything to do with legacy.
Is that did you say it on purpose, as in an ironic way, that they have an identity problem?
Yes. In so many ways, but I'm talking about anybody who has taken an existing Microsoft services account and signed it up for Office 365 has descended into the tenantitis hell of, depending on what service you're logging into, you may or may not get something. And let's not even talk about how some software, when you do that, propagates that identity onto Windows and changes your Windows identity in the process. And isn't that hilarious? They've been steadily fixing those problems, but those problems are just not trivial. And I think I'm one of the owners of one of the earliest accounts in Microsoft that may or may not have a country associated whatsoever.
Oh, that's neat.
Being a Canadian and knowing I have several accounts that are US associated and several accounts that are Canadian associated, and the two cannot mix.
That's right.
Like these are all the kinds of problems that we encounter.
Well, you're also,
and I'm not an
early adopter, essentially, right? I mean, you're
in a unique space. In general, in the MVP group, all of us have identity problems at Microsoft because we were beta testers, because we had MSA accounts that then became AAD accounts. It's like there's like a couple of thousand of us, and who cares? But this is the story you've got here is the least painful part of what Entra is really talking about, which is the
other stuff is horrific.
Yes, this is wait till you see the rest.
This is the only part of it that I care about, so I don't even. I look at the rest. I'm like, I'm not ever dealing with this.
But you talk about from an IT perspective, the core issue is how do I have guests into my Azure and M365 tenants? And every product's done it differently, and it's nightmarish.
Yep.
And so the idea that they could come to a coordinated solution is compelling. Like that would be nice.
All right. I appreciate a semi-positive spin on this.
Yeah, I mean, they are addressing a problem that's a real problem. They're not just making new trouble for each other. And I bring up the other implications around the fact that it is a new team tackling stuff. And so,
and I think that makes it easier to say goodbye to the past. So the thing that a little kind of in the back of my brain bothers me a little bit to them is just clean sheet, fresh start, overdue. You know,
but they can't. I mean, that's one of the problems, right?
That's true. I'm sorry.
Cannot be
I'm from a brand. Sorry, no, they're not changing the product. Sorry,
no,
they're literally not changing the product. Right. Sorry, I meant from a branding perspective.
Yeah, the rebranding helps. The reorganization helps. I mean, it's this naming strategy and what they're doing here is as much for the rest of Microsoft as it is for the customer.
Yep.
Right. It's just to remind everyone, hey, it's a new day.
Yeah. The problem is this stuff's been around for a long time, and there's lots of references to it out in the world.
Well, without a doubt, but also a number of VPs have dashed their careers on the identity rocks of Microsoft.
Yep.
Right. So I don't envy the next guy coming up. But let's face it, if you can crack this nut, you've cracked one of the most difficult nuts in Microsoft. So I wish them well. Our lives would be better if they succeed.
I desperately want to use the phrase, speaking of nuts and Microsoft, this next story.
Did you desperately want to? Really?
Then I just did.
Yeah, so there you go. Now here we are.
Pretty much gives into all his wants and needs, I think. So
I know I'm a baby. But are you guys familiar with Mark Lukowski?
Mm-hmm.
You guys are.
So this was
I don't know who he is.
Yeah, he's a member of the original NT team who came over from DEC. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He's volatile, I guess I would say, as a lot of geniuses can be, right?
I would call him Gatesian.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
He worked very well in Gates's Microsoft, the same kind of intellectual stormy.
There is an infamous story that when he went to tell then Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer that he was leaving the company to go to Google, that Ballmer threw a chair into the wall and then went on a profanity-laden tirade, which I can't repeat here.
That was a tempered glass wall.
It went through it. It exploded. Yeah. Okay, I was going to say I thought it went through it, but then I was like, it was a wall. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, it was a wall. It was a dividing wall for Steve's office, and it shattered.
So I'm going to give you the clean version of his rant, which is effing Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO, I guess, of Google
at the time.
Is an effing, I can't say that word, screamed at him, I'm going to effing bury that guy. I've done it before. I'll do it again. I'm going to effing kill Google. Google isn't even a real company. It's a house of cards.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. And that's 20 plus years ago. Pretty close. That was at the beginning of Ballmer being CEO.
It was almost, I think it was like 19-ish years ago. That's exactly right. So, Schmidt went on to work for Google. I forget what part of the company at that time, but he was there for a long time. He left briefly to go to VMware and then came back to Google, where he has led their kind of AR, XR efforts. And in a very John Carmackian move, he has just left the company and has decided to burn the bridges on the way out and tweeted publicly that the recent changes in AR leadership and Google's unstable commitment and vision weighed heavily on my decision. Some people are speculating he might be going to Apple, by the way. I don't know if that's true.
Apple's grabbed up a bunch of good AR people. Like, it's where the AR action is right now. So I've seen some HoloLens folks have moved.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely not at Google, so it's got to be better than Google for that, right?
So I would say I've been kind of down on anything VR, MR, XR, AR, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just don't see it bursting into the mainstream or whatever.
No.
But I will tell you
he didn't join Google again. He was at Oculus when they got acquired.
Okay. But he did just leave Google.
So he left Microsoft to go to Google for a few years, and then he was off doing some other things, and then he ended up at Oculus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Facebook bought Oculus, and he bailed then.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the point is, for whatever reason, for some number of years, this guy, who I think is, again, one of the smartest people I know, I have to feel like he must be onto something. Like, he really feels strongly about this stuff. And I think he's going to, well, no, based on what he has said publicly.
A very high level executive to say that, senior director of engineering.
He was one of the key guys on the NT team. And in the sense that the quote from, I'm going to paraphrase this, but I think it was Dave Cutler who said, NT is so big that no one can keep it all in their heads at once, but Mark comes closest.
Wow.
It was something like that.
Yeah, you think he'd know better than burn bridges like this, but he very much was an engineering guy.
He's very hot-blooded.
Yeah.
But I mean, the words Google and unstable kind of go together.
They make for an excellent headline,
He's
Liam.
not wrong.
And I would argue, like, Google really is struggling right now. Finally, the cash cow is somewhat threatened by these large language models, and I don't think they have.
I mean, look at this guy's face. If you saw him looking at you like that in a bar, you would know that the next thing coming was you getting punched in the face.
I'd also guess that he made his bed this morning. I'm just saying.
He looks like a bed maker.
Looks like a bed maker.
We can all agree. Most people in the industry are kind of on the same part of the ADHD spectrum that I am.
But also, he was a distinguished engineer. Like, this is a high-end individual contributor, an IC, which means he tries to avoid leading people in the first place, and actually for a reason.
So I'm sorry, you're right about Facebook and then what became Meta, because when he went there, I actually wrote a news story about it at the time. He went there to help them start an operating system, and he is an operating system, architect,
like from the beginning.
So, but when this was before anyone knew what would Facebook need an operating system for? Now we know it's for the Oculus, for the AR VR stuff.
Yeah. This guy though gets around,
and you got the right guy.
He's been on a few. I mean, you might think his employment history shows some instability.
Yeah, and yet this is one of those 10x guys, 10x divas, and you'll pay the price. He's worth it because he makes unbelievable.
Well, that's the thing. He probably gets offered millions and millions.
He's going to burn bright, and he's going to burn fast, and he's like MacArthur. He's good for the invasion, and then after that, it's time to let him go. But
and has burnt very long. Like, he's not 20.
Well, that's the thing. So you were talking about, careers and whatever. He came with Dave Cutler to Microsoft in probably 89, I think was the year or whatever. Yeah. But Dave Cutler is still at Microsoft. What the hell? And that doesn't make any sense.
80. He's 80.
So, I mean.
And apparently is a walking HR violation. Like, he is surrounded by people to keep him out of trouble.
That's right. Yeah, don't let him talk to the press.
But there's also, he's still a remarkable genius. And
oh my God, also, yes, of course.
He also carries a gravity that the only other person I knew that carried that kind of gravity was like Jim Gray and Bill Gates. Yeah, when he says you should do something, everybody just does it.
Right. So I think that, Lukowski, I guess, is one step down from that, but he is in that rarefied air. I mean, oh my God, his credentials are unimpeachable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's just so.
And so in some ways, it's like, ultra genius creates yet another storm is kind of the headline.
Yeah, that's right. Carmack left Meta. He also did this little burning bridges thing, and
I thought his letter was fairly graceful, but he did indict Zuck.
Yes.
I mean, I think he called it the largest waste of money he's ever seen in his life. But,
this is a guy who built his life on being as efficient as possible, and then went into this pit of inefficiency.
Yes, it's like,
and it must have driven him insane. Just like making the bed makes me insane.
Bales of money into a furnace insane.
Yes. And there's the only difference being billions of dollars.
Yes. All right. Those are big bales.
All right. We have a surprising number of dev topics this week. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Like, how luxurious to me.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Microsoft introducing new C# capabilities into Visual Studio.
C# Dev Kit.
I almost said .code for some reason. Code, which is their kind of lightweight code editor as opposed to the full Visual Studio.
Kind of. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, kind of lightweight, I think is what I was getting at there. But it is more lightweight than Visual Studio, for sure.
Well, one's an IDE, one's an editor. They're different.
Yeah. Yes. Different ways to program, right? I mean, and speak to different groups of, developer types and et cetera, 100%. Et cetera.
Exactly. Right.
So for those who don't know, .NET MAUI is the successor to Xamarin Forums, which is a product that came to Microsoft as part of Xamarin, that acquisition, Miguel de Casa, et cetera. And it's messy in different ways, but the big point of that product when it was outside of Microsoft was we're going to take C# and .NET, we're going to bring it to a cross-platform developer product. The original version, or at least by the time Microsoft got it, supported creating like one project to create apps that would run on the iPhone Android and Windows Phone, I think, Windows Mobile or whatever. Windows Phone probably. Windows Phone obviously died, and Microsoft at one point kind of contorted it into supporting Windows modern apps like Metro style apps, UWP, whatever.
UWP.
Yeah. So .NET MAUI expands that. So there's a lot of other improvements. There's some good things there. It's still a little messy, in my opinion. Still a little immature as well.
Yeah. It's sort of a V1.1.
It's almost a V0.
They got it done, but it's a lot of moving parts. Unifying all because you realize that under MAUI is also the WinForm stack, the WPF stack.
Yeah, but that's
the by the way, WinUI stack.
This is why this is so fascinating, right? Yeah. So they Xamarin, not Xamarin, but .NET MAUI can also create. So they do all the mobile stuff still. They do some Tizen stuff, which is a little goofy, probably for smart devices like TVs. That no one really talks about that much. Windows apps, Mac apps, right, through Catalyst, because it's the way they bring those mobile apps forward into the desktop. This is a Visual Studio product, right? So this sits in Visual Studio along desktop workloads, like those things you just said: Windows Presentation Foundation, Windows Forum, also Win32 apps and C++, and Universal Windows Platform apps, right? By the way, the replacement for UWP, which is called not Project Reunion, but called what? The Windows App SDK, is not a workload in this product. You actually have to go into the, change the settings and add some things to get that in there. So this was more of a formal part of Visual Studio than even the most modern way to create what I'm going to call native, Windows apps. And now they have pulled it into. They're not pulling it out of Visual Studio, right? Because there's still an audience that will want to do that. But they are making it possible. I've not looked at this yet, but to create MAUI apps, which are cross-platform, in Visual Studio Code, which is cross-platform, right? And also open source. That is fascinating.
Why?
I mean, because I would have thought, I don't know what the logistics are, the politics inside of Microsoft, but it seems to me that there are these two sides and they do two different things. And I would have thought that the Visual Studio guys would have said, no, this is our thing. You need us to do this.
I mean, the API teams run on their own. They want to run as many surfaces as possible. And so they're incented to do this. Studio is typically the first home for all of the stuff. The first time you see new features in .NET and so forth, it goes there. But there are other users.
There are far more other users. That's the point. So for Visual Studio, full Visual Studio has an audience of some millions, whatever the number is.
And growing, by the way.
It is, okay, but it's millions. And it's very specific workloads, right? They're not all Windows. In fact, arguably most of them are not Windows. But
most of them, these days, most deploy to Linux, even though they develop on Windows.
Okay. But it grew up in the way it grew up, and it is what it is. It's a big IDE, that kind of thing. Visual Studio Code was a recognition of a lot of things, but one of the most important ones for this discussion was this notion that there are far more developers out in the world that are not targeting Microsoft workloads, traditional Microsoft stack workloads, including, frankly, .NET, although .NET has since gone open source and, whatever fits into that world very well. Yeah. It's almost an ideological thing here. It's very interesting to me that this is happening because I think this speaks to the reality that there's an even bigger developer base out in the world that is not on those traditional Microsoft stack products and services.
Well, and I would argue that one of the gateway drugs to an IDE is I think IDEs all suffer from the same problem, which is that there hasn't been a lot of new ones. I would argue Rider is the newest. And so they have a reputation of being your dad's dev tool. I would argue in favor of them, as somebody who's clearly a dad.
And also grew up using this tool. And I think that's a big part of it.
Existed before the IDE existed, was excited when it emerged because now we didn't have to
solve the problem. You also didn't have to use completely different environments to target different languages. It actually solved the problem. Today, I would say to younger developers who did not grow up in that world, I mean, I'm sure Visual Studio looks like a hairball.
What do they use instead? The Notepad plus? I mean,
they roll their own. Visual Studio Code, and they compose all the pieces together to get the dev stack they want.
It's not what they use instead. It's what are they targeting instead? Yeah. Because Visual Studio came up in a world that you would be targeting Windows.
Right.
And it still has
struggles to shake that cruft off.
That's right.
Like it is hard to deploy to other platforms.
You couldn't argue that Turbo Pascal was the first IDE. I mean, I think of an ID as I mean, a few features that are unique to an ID is, I guess, code completion, syntax coloring,
so actually,
compiling in the editor, right? So
but you need the point was you didn't have to go to the command line at the time to do
compiles in the editor, right? Yeah.
But so Visual Studio Code, IDE is almost the wrong term, because it's not just it is an IDE. I mean, it is because it does all those things.
I wouldn't argue that code is an IDE in the sense that you can compile.
Yeah, exactly. You can
make it into your dev environment.
That's right. That's exactly right.
What it is.
But Visual Studio, full Visual Studio expands beyond that kind of turbo Pascal notion of an IDE, because it is to developers what Office was to productivity, where you bring in multiple things into one place and can do it all from in there. And the simplest example being, they used to be a separate product called Visual Studio, a separate product called Visual C++, separate product called at one time Visual J++, whatever. Mm-hmm. These things all are available in one thing. They're not separate apps running, doing their own thing. And that makes sense because, back in the day, you might want to write a component and let's make something up, Visual Basic, and then access it from a program that you wrote in C++ or whatever.
Well, the other thing is the way Studio was built, you could bring new languages into it. And F# being a great example of it.
Yep, it's extensible and it's big. So
and it comes with a lot of features for free. The original time I encountered Don Syme back in the day was when he was writing a paper saying, "Hey, I'm experimenting with OCaml, and I love using the Visual Studio for this because I get an editor, debugger, a project manager, like all of those things are there."
I know, but that's the thing. That's what's interesting though, because a lot of those things are coming to Visual Studio Code optionally. Mm-hmm. as add-ins, or whatever the terminology is, and as more and more of what's useful from Visual Studio, full Visual Studio today, gets pulled into this product. I wonder if there's this. This is almost like the rebranding of Entra ID. It's like, does this other thing at some point kind of go away, or at least be de-emphasized?
Well, I would argue it puts pressure on Studio to be better.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Because there are alternatives. I still feel like turning code into a large scale project managing development tool where you have to pull all the bits in is a pain in the butt. It's certainly hard on juniors, where
I know
there are pretty simple templates in Studio to make that quick.
It makes it eventually as complex as full Visual Studio, right? But the point of it is the base of the product is not that, so you don't have to use that stuff. When you bring up Visual Studio, you got the soul. It's a battleship.
You get the 747 and there's the cockpit, right? And it's for new developers, I think, very intimidating.
I guess all I'm trying to say is code is obviously a much more modern product, and is, maybe it's showing itself to be architecturally capable of doing a lot.
Yeah, it has a
more
great
things
extensibility model.
Yeah, it really
what
does.
makes something an IDE? As opposed to
it's what you said. An IDE is exactly what you said. Okay. So it is, back in the day, developers would have to write source code in an editor.
Yeah, you go out and you compile it.
They would drop down and they would compile it and link it, and then they would run it. Mm-hmm. In the early days of Windows, you would have to do this from a command line in DOS, run Windows, and then run your app, look at it, say, "Oh crap, I did something wrong." Exit Windows, go into your IDE, go into your editor. Sorry. It's a thing that solves a problem, and that problem is what I just described. Visual Studio solved the problem that we have all these different IDEs for different languages, for the most part, I guess. Let's bring them all into one foundational product.
And more so than consistently found a place where developers want something like, "Hey, I want to make it easy to deploy, to manage my source code in GitHub." There's an extension for you
might argue
the easy there.
You might argue that VS Code is more powerful than Visual Studio.
This is like saying an electric car.
Would be a better word.
Flexible.
It's an electric car compared to a pickup truck.
Okay.
My argument is the IDE comes with a set of pre-configured things, so that you don't have to decide
anything. Okay.
The debugger, the source code manager, the cloud deployment, as long as it's Azure, it's all there.
Visual Studio Code is a roll your own, and it can be as simple or complex as you want it. Yeah. There are advantages to both approaches. I feel like overall Visual Studio Code I know it is, but it feels more modern. It's more.
Yeah.
It's certainly newer. It does not have 30 years of legacy attached to it, which Studio has.
But increasingly, it's benefiting from some of the good stuff that came out of all that experience, right?
Without a doubt.
Bring it all the IntelliSense stuff, the C# stuff that just happened, which is optional, and then this thing, which I .NET MAUI is whatever, but this is .NET MAUI is fairly new, is extremely new. It's interesting. Like this is a Visual Studio thing.
MAUI shipped in the past couple of years, and so it is relatively fresh. It's really a .NET thing, right? It's really what it is, and so you don't even have to use Studio or Studio Code really if you don't want to. It's just and
use the command line if you wanted to. Actually,
it's the first C# I wrote was in Notepad.
Of course, and I like the way that .NET MAUI as a .NET part of the .NET family kind of thematically makes sense alongside Visual Studio Code, which is itself open source. It's like the new Microsoft. Like they almost go together. I know it came out of another company, but that company was designed around bringing .NET to cross-platform, like
to more platforms.
It has the same. It's in the same.
MAUI also represents not just refactoring Xamarin Forms, but trying to consolidate XAML as a whole.
Yeah,
right. They fragmented XAML pretty heavily for a variety of reasons, and this is supposed to be the unified UI stack that Microsoft lost their way in the UI stacks. Even though having some of the best ones because they were so fragmented.
XAML's last stand.
Well, trying to get XAML back to what it originally intended to be.
Yeah. Interesting. I knew you'd have something to say about this.
I'm definitely on it. And I mean, let's face it, the machine I'm on right now has both Studio and Code, and they both have roles for me, right? The bottom line is when I want to make modifications to the Run As site to go into the project in Studio that is the Run As site that checks my code in through GitHub and deals with all my Azure credentials and does all of those things for me is compelling. It's great. When I need to edit JSON files or write some heaven help me Python
code, of course.
Code.
You want lightweight. Yeah.
There is no project there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Goodness knows I don't want Anaconda. So
that's actually, code. That might be the simplest way to describe it. That Visual Studio is oriented around projects. Yes. Solutions that could have multiple projects even.
Yes.
But Visual Studio Code is either you're opening a file or a folder.
Right. And when they added the .NET Dev Kit, they at least gave you ability to view into those bigger projects and stuff now. Like they understand
part of it. Yeah. Files. Part of it is a solution/project view. I don't remember how they called it.
And that's been partly because customers are complaining. Hey, I really like code, but this thing I'm working on is a solution and has multiple projects, and there's just no way to do that in code. It's all separate folders, and now I have a giant external build process and and it's like, hey, that's something that Studio does just fine. And so, all right, we'll give it to you over there. I would not want to try and set up a solution from DevKit. I would rather set it up in Studio and know my DevKit people can work on it.
Yep.
Like one would argue that the .NET Dev Kit piece that just came a little while ago is so that the guy working on the Python side of this app is still part of the solution.
Okay.
Because writing Python inside of Studio isn't very, very difficult.
Although I think, if I'm not mistaken, Python is a top level workload in Visual Studio. I think I never use it, but I think it is. Yes, I'm sure.
Except unless you try and hire Python people, and they're like, "You want me to work where?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that was the same thing. So web devs, right? You wanted me to use Visual Studio. I use a text editor and a command line.
Well, and why be a barrier? Like building these bridges so that your existing effective developers in Studio aren't being crushed on, and the new devs you're bringing in that come in with a larger diversity of tool interests but can live in code can at least all speak the same project.
Okay, we got to move on from this.
Yeah.
This is too much stuff.
You guys love talking about this stuff. I love it. Me too.
I can feel the audience walking away.
Yeah. Okay. More dev stuff. Okay.
Well, we can skim through this, right? Let me look. What do we got here? Most of this is not super interesting. So, DevBox, which Microsoft announced at Build last year, is now generally available. The interesting thing about this to me is like this obviously came out of stuff Microsoft was doing with Windows 365 and yada yada, and we lived in a world. You got to remember that over a year ago where there were serious component shortages and people couldn't get PCs out to their devs. And so Microsoft said, hey, let's get this thing up in the cloud and we can have these dev environments in a cloud-based PC that can be configured before you get there. You turn it on, it's just there, it works great, yada, yada, yada.
It's also a great way to control your source. It's not on, sure. Especially when you're using
it's never local
and things. Yeah, it's never local.
It should never be local. But
it's not always possible. So we were doing this with terminal services back in the day. Like, you want to be unhappy, that's a good way to do it.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, it's out. It's they support more powerful configurations if you want it. I feel like this thing is very expensive. And I also feel like maybe there's less of a use case for it today than it was a year and a half ago. But
the folks that I know that are concerned about the security side of thing aren't worried about the price.
There you go.
Okay. They've decided that the security is that concerning.
Right.
That's how they do it.
So that's that. We can skip Raspberry Pi. Who cares?
Yeah.
And then GitHub announced, we talked about this coming, but the public beta of passkey authentication. The theory here being that passwords are terrible for security, and they're going to do away with passwords over time. So that public beta is available.
Yeah, and I've been using YubiKeys for my GitHub account for ages. It just makes me also use a password, which seems silly.
Yep.
I use SSH. And
as I've been
public keys. Well, it's nice because I can check in, check out, and all that stuff from the command line without typing a password or anything. Mm-hmm. It's great. Yeah.
So, can we move on to Xbox?
Let's do some Xbox stuff. Why not?
Only a couple things, but both of these are very interesting, I think. So I've been writing a series of articles on kind of tech nostalgia, right? Like it's video games and early personal computing type stuff. And I've been to make this make sense, I'm doing a ton of research and looking into references I can provide to people, like books you might want to read, documentaries you might want to watch, emulators you could use to use this software today on your PC, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just weird kind of timing, but Microsoft, through the Xbox Wire blog, actually a third-party Digital Eclipse announced that they're going to release a series of what they call interactive classic video game documentaries on the Xbox Series X and S and Xbox One. Now, what these things are is, they'll probably all be a little different, but the idea is you can play the game, you can play the original game, you can play different versions of the game.
How interesting.
You can play a modern version of the game that will be unique to this package. But they also have all this awesome material where you get to meet the developer. There's interviews. They talk about how they did things, how it changed over time, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's really proper cashing in on nostalgia. Like, that's
absolutely.
But what's cool, because it's on the Xbox, it's not just watching a documentary. You can play the game.
You're also playing the game. I love the association.
That. Yeah.
Then it's not just nostalgia; it's also history, because you can now your kids can learn it.
So, but for me personally, and I'm really into this stuff, and like I said, I've been writing about it. This is like lands right in the middle of what I'm doing, because the first game is Karateka, which is a classic Apple II game created by Jordan Mechner, who also wrote Prince of Persia, another classic game. I had already earmarked him and his games for my series because he has written 2 books, The Making of Karateka and The Making of Prince of Persia, in which he documents how he created those games. And of course, those games are classics. If you want to play them today, there are modern version. There's a modern version on Steam, which looks kind of goofy. It looks like kind of a animation style game, like a cartoon. But there's something called Karateka Classic, which you can download or buy, I think, on iPhone and iPad and Android, which is basically a port of the original game. So it looks like the Apple II version. I think that is so cool. So it all kind of is coming together here. It's kind of neat. I ever thought I would have like a news article in this series, but I think this qualifies because this like lands right in the center of this stuff. So this coming interactive documentary on Karateka looks amazing. And I can't wait to see what the other ones are.
What a good idea.
I think this is really neat.
Prince of Persia on Steam as the full 5-game bundle for $9.
Yeah. I mean, listen, here, the thing that's fascinating about the best, a lot of classic games, like when you go back to the early 80s, late 70s, whatever, it's astonishing how many of them are still fun today.
Yeah.
You can find fun games that you still want to play throughout history, right? Yeah. Doom, Quake, and whatever from the 90s. But it's astonishing. And I think it literally is tied to the fact that these systems were so limited that the people that wrote games had to be super creative.
Yeah.
And it just forced them to, bring out more of themselves. And I have been we're gonna get to this soon. I've been playing a lot of retro games lately. It's really kind of interesting. If I were to point at the single biggest problem I have with Xbox, I would admit that this is probably a problem elsewhere. It's just that I play on Xbox. It's online toxicity, and this is other people playing in a game with you who are behaving badly, often through their actions, but also often through their words. And so one of the things that I've been doing now forever, and I know I haven't played on Xbox in a few months, but is I mute globally everyone's microphone at the Xbox level. I don't go into a game and ever hear anyone else because everyone else is terrible.
Yeah.
It just
this game would
terrible.
be great except for the other players.
Yep. It's like France would be great if it wasn't for the French. But this is a problem. Microsoft has talked a lot about fixing this problem over the years and has done very little about it. Although there was a period where they made a real effort at one point. But anyway, it's fallen by the wayside again. So Microsoft announced today they're going to bring a voice reporting feature to Xbox. And the idea here is what you're going to be able to do is someone has said something terrible and you press a button and it captures the last 60 seconds of gameplay, which will include this inappropriate in-game stuff. And you can report it to Microsoft and then they will, go after these people. Right?
Xbox dash cam.
Yeah.
Well, and presumably they have a machine learning model for actually parsing this.
Oh, it's totally AI.
Because no human can.
All AI,
it's impossible to do otherwise. Because that's a lot of clips that are about to land. Like that should be pretty astonishing.
Sure. I mean, this is like the guys that would have to look at reports about child pornography, whatever, awful, because they're just the most. They just need so much, help with therapy and like anybody who works in EMT space, like it's all awful. Yeah. You see everything awful.
You see horrible things. You see everybody at their worst. And goodness knows when you listen to the stream that comes out of video games, you're hearing people at their worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can fix that. Just record it.
Well, it looks like we're trying. I welcome any effort to prevent online or to at least help fix online toxicity.
I just think that's going to be a lot of clips. Holy man.
Yep. Listen, the best clips are they'll all be on YouTube, right? The funniest clips that we're reporting.
Xbox dash cam.
Check out this guy.
Yeah, but I wonder what they're going to do. I mean, what are they going to do? Do they warn you and then kick you off, or?
Yeah, see, I mean, there's plenty of mechanisms around all of that, mostly focused on cheating and hacking, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna get a 3 strikes kind of thing.
But a lot of teenagers on there, young teenagers, are just jerks, right? And what do you do?
But when they realize they're being hurt and
it's a teaching moment.
It's
a teaching moment.
It is. Yes. And it all falls nicely under what is already in the terms of use. So there's no question here.
Good point.
Just a question of making it cheap enough to force.
Yeah. Okay, kids, let's take a break because the tips of the week coming up, the app of the week, and the brown liquor pick of the week. All ahead. But first, it's time to talk about CashFly. You are listening to this show, most of you, thanks to CashFly, our CDN, our Content Delivery Network. One thing, we learned very early on, a lot of people learning, users don't hang around. Viewers don't hang around for videos that buffer. Shoppers will abandon shopping carts on e-commerce sites that are slow. Gamers will leave bad reviews if the latency is high. That's why you gotta use CashFly. Customers expect and deserve a faultless experience when engaging with content on any device, anytime, anywhere in the world. Building trusted CDN relationships since 1999, CashFly has held a track record for high-performing, ultra-reliable content delivery for more than 2 decades now. They pioneered the use of TCP Anycast way back in 2002, more than 20 years ago, and that's an innovation most CDNs are just now starting to build on. CashFly calls it QoE, quality of experience. It's the single most critical metric when you're serving content simultaneously to a large global audience. And frankly, your delivery stack can be your secret weapon. With CacheFly, you get ultra-low latency video streaming that'll deliver video to more than 1 million concurrent users. Lightning-fast gaming that'll deliver downloads faster with zero lag, glitches, or outages. Mobile content optimization. So you get automatic and simple image optimization for your website, so it loads faster no matter what device. CacheFly is the only CDN built for throughput, delivering rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods, 30% faster than other major CDNs. Plus, you'll never pay for service overlap. Again, you get flexible month-to-month billing for as long as you need it, discounts for fixed term once you're happy. Design your own contract when you switch to CacheFly. That's what we did because we've been using CacheFly now for more than 10 years. I think more like 15 years. 3,500 clients in more than 80 countries. Organizations consistently choose CacheFly for scalability, for reliability, for unrivaled performance. And we wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you, CacheFly. Learn how you can get your first month free at CacheFly.com. How many times have you heard me say it? CacheFly. Bandwidth provided for Windows Weekly by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. Thank you, CacheFly. Now to the back of
what was the company again?
CacheFly. Have I said that enough? CacheFly. Maybe if I spell it for you. CACHE.
The Stephen Wright joke, I drove across the country and there was one cassette stuck in the player and I can't remember what it was.
I love Stephen Wright. Is he still around? Is he still performing?
Oh, yes.
Very funny guy.
Yeah, he's great.
Paul Thurrott. Speaking of funny guys, let's do your back of the book. Pick of the week.
Yeah, so
tip of the week.
We'll just stick with the Xbox/game theme. Back in March, Microsoft dropped its $1 Game Pass trial offer. It replaced it with sort of a goofy new friend referral program, which everyone hated. And so now it's back. So if you haven't sampled Game Pass, you can now try it again for $1. So that's available. It's available at, where is it available? Where's that? Sorry, Xbox.com. Wherever you get your Xbox stuff, it's there.
There.
So
Xbox.com.
if you want to give that, yeah.
That's a good place to start.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, log in with your Microsoft
Xbox
account. Yeah.
And earlier I mentioned the retro stuff. My most recent entry was about the Intellivision, which was my first video game system. Also my first computer, interestingly, because I bought the computer adapter for it and I taught myself BASIC on it, which is hilarious. Because this thing had such a low resolution screen. I think it was like 20 columns by 11 or something. It was
not a lot of text.
Yeah, big all caps. It was so limited that they only could afford 4 characters for every basic command. So yeah, it was just. But the fun thing was you could plug in a game cartridge and you could write code that would access the sprites in the game and use them in your own goofy little programs.
Oh, that's
you
cool.
Couldn't use them without the cartridge. It was just for learning it, whatever.
Yeah.
But
by far, my favorite game on Intellivision was NHL hockey.
Nice.
Because if you could board check the guy just right, he'd go over the boards.
All right, so I'll give you. So my brother. It took me only a short while to figure this one out. But if you think about a football field as being like horizontal lines and the yard markers are vertical lines, you could move your quarterback up to the top of the screen so that his head went against the top line, but his arm was kind of even with it, and his legs were still in the field, so he wasn't out of bounds. And he would throw the ball, and the ball was white, just like the line.
Right.
So you couldn't see it.
You didn't know where it was.
He would run a guy straight down the field in the middle of the thing. The game would scroll with that guy, and then he would run up to the top of the screen, catch the ball, which you couldn't see, and then run it in for a touchdown.
Wow.
And it had that classic Intellivision noise generator, like, for the cloud noise. That was one of my favorites. Anyway, so the actual app pick is something called Nostalgia, which I believe is the only decent Intellivision emulator you can get on the PC. I should mention from sort of an ethical standpoint that all of the intellectual property associated with Intellivision is still owned by a company. I'm having trouble locking this one down, but I believe it's Blue Sky Rangers, which was the name of the team of the original developers of the games. What this means is that they're actually pretty cool about this. They will allow you to download the ROMs for the system, which involves like the kernel. There's one for the computer, one for the IntelliVoice, graphics was one, as well as all of the game ROMs, all of which, like the Atari ones, are hilariously small, like 2 to 8K, like they're nothing, as long as you own the hardware. So the idea is if you have it in television and you have the cartridges for the games that you are downloading, they have no legal issue.
They'll give you the ROMs for it.
Well, they won't give them to you. You just have to Google them.
They just won't sue you.
Get them.
They just won't sue.
They won't sue you. No, I mean, I think we all understand anyone could do this. And for purposes of what I'll call journalistic endeavors, I did do it because I wanted to take those screenshots for the article. But it's, I feel ethically I gotta just mention that. But
yeah,
the Intellivision, oh my God, is literally my favorite. My favorite game was Night Stalker, by the way. But
it was a great game too.
But there were so many great games, and when you go through the list, it's sort of incredible. I also note that my greatest journalistic endeavor was that I was able to contribute to the original Intellivision FAQ. My name is still there, along with my email address from 1993. Which is from an ISP in Phoenix called Net something. I already forgot it. Netcom, I think. And that was because I was able to buy some shrink-wrapped, never-opened games that a lot of people didn't even know had ever been released because this company in Phoenix had bought at auction the remains of a giant electronics store from California, and it had all these classic video games in boxes that had never been opened. And so I would buy them for a couple of bucks a piece and sell them on Usenet, if you can believe that, through AOL, which was a dial-in service at the time, because people in other parts of the country and the world didn't even know these things existed and suddenly could buy a pristine copy of this game, as if it was 1983, So anyway, that's my little role in the Intellivision history or whatever. So.
I think our memory of these games are still superior to the games themselves.
Absolutely, guarantee you.
Having played Night Stalker this week, I might disagree.
Really?
I'm
okay.
It's still, and one still holds up. I'm not saying they all do, but that one does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a good game.
Richard, Run As Radio. What's coming up?
Mm-hmm. This week's show published yesterday, as usual, talking to Johan Arwidmark, one of our favorite deployment gods. And once again, visiting Windows 11 deployment. The pressure is on for IT folks to get their offices ready to move to 11, since in theory 10 is going to go out of support in 2025. And so I've been talking to internal and external people about what's the appropriate way to migrate when you're talking about hundreds or even thousands of seats. So it's one thing to talk to Arya Carly, who works on the on Windows Update itself. It's like, here's the tools as we recommend them. And then to go to a guy down in the weeds with the companies like Arwidmark and say, so what are you doing? And he's bringing up the problems with a classic tool called Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, which has been working great for years and years, but has some problems with Windows 11. And so they've now got an open source version of it they call the Friends of MDT to help you with those particular challenges, called the PS App Deploy Toolkit. So there are many choices, obviously, to doing deployment, and I'm just trying to get to the most of them so that folks have all the tools in front of them as they're running down that clock, where here we are halfway through 2023. It is not a lot of time you're going to need to have a plan, or you're going to be coughing up $50 a seat for each of your Windows 10 machines to continue support.
Yikes.
That's the usual. I mean, my gut still says they're going to push that back because some big companies are going to go, nope. But can't guarantee that, so you need to get prepared.
Mr. Campbell, do you have a pick of the week for your brown beverages?
I've gone back into my roster of whiskeys that taught me something, like when I was getting into that space of learning more about the industry and so forth.
Whiskey taught me a lot of things.
It teaches everyone something.
It teaches all something. Sometimes it's how quickly can you run to a toilet.
Yeah.
This particular whiskey is made by a company called Smooth Ambler. Now, what's unusual about Smooth Ambler? Well, Smooth Ambler is in West Virginia. And a lot of people believe that it can't be considered bourbon if it's not made in Kentucky, which also begs the question, like, why do we only want to make whiskey in Kentucky at all? It's clearly not true, because Jack is in Tennessee and is arguably the definitive bourbon, even though it's not called a bourbon, because it does break the rules of bourbon, where Smooth Ambler does not, because the FDA regulations around bourbon say in America.
Yeah.
But what's key to Smooth Ambler, which is key to all whiskey makers, is water source. And Kentucky is a popular place to make bourbon, not only because it has the grains, plenty of growing land there, but it has very soft water in its rivers because of the limestone karst that Kentucky sits on. Well, that karst extends east into West Virginia, and the Greenbrier River, it benefits from that as well, and it's extremely soft water, and it is where Smooth Ambler gets their water from. That, and to me, that was a surprise. I had believed for a long time. You sort of thought, Kentucky's where you make whiskey. What are these West Virginians doing? And their Old Scout, to me, is it's a very rare creature in the sense that it is a cask strength bourbon.
I like
That's
that.
unusual. Typically comes in at about 53.5. It is a high rye bourbon, which is to say it's 60% corn, 36% rye, and 4% malted barley. That's a fairly low amount of barley, but that's fine. But a very high amount of rye, so you are getting a pretty spicy poke at your throat there.
Peppery punch.
Oh yeah, and it'll come at you. It's relatively. They
drink this and I'll come at you.
Rye can be harsh.
The kind word is spicy, and then, I mean, it's still a majority corn, which also is a requirement for being a bourbon. Has to be 51% corn. They are strictly column still, no pot stilling. Good barreling. They're classic American toasted oak barreling. Typically 5 years, very common. No coloring, no filtration. They make a relatively small amount. And so sometimes it can be hard to find. But when I see it, I will buy a bottle. And it is inexpensive, $40. So well worth keeping on the shelf. For me, it's a whiskey I turn to when somebody who's a bourbon fan says the only good bourbons are made in Kentucky. And then I'll pour you an Old Scout.
So what did you call it? The limestone
karsk?
Karsk. So the interesting thing is that also continues east into all of Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you remember this from when you stayed with me, but our water is very soft as well. And we treat it actually at the house level, so maybe you wouldn't. But it's a big problem for pipes and things like that. I don't know why they don't fix this at the municipality
water
level,
processing, and the
water treatment,
right?
Yeah,
like
they can.
Often, this is what actually happened in Flint, Michigan, is that they changed the chemistry of the water by changing the source and didn't adjust it because it would cost money.
Okay. So don't, for some reason they don't, I would imagine it's one of those short-sighted things where people I don't want to pay the taxes to fix that, but then they have to spend all this money bringing water filters into their houses and salt and whatever other nonsense. But I guess what I was kind of leading to was this, we have a lot of craft distillery action in my area. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't surprise me to discover that there are some excellent Pennsylvania whiskeys, bourbons, whatever that
are you
just are not discovered. That just I'm not saying you have to visit, but
you're never there.
Well, but I think there's the great possibility. Right? I mean, I think the entire state is built on limestone.
Yes, and it is a key part to making good water. The bigger issue being manganese and iron in the water makes water bad for distillation. Like it does, it blackens things, and it really is disruptive on the flavor.
Interesting.
So you'd rather have a little limestone scale than have manganese or iron poisoning, effectively.
Right. Huh. Yeah, I don't know a lot about it. Coming from Massachusetts, I was confused by the notion of soft water.
Yeah, and understanding
why wouldn't you?
What's the big deal? And understanding all of this is treatable, it's just costly, and you're trying to make the best price product you can. So when you have to pick a place to make your distillery, you pick a place with an inexpensive water supply and a ready access to grain.
Why is soft water better for making bourbon?
Well, for any distillate needs soft water because the things that make water hard, the
minerals,
irons, those kinds
really
of. There are some minerals that are good, some minerals are bad. The specifically bad ones are what they call the blacks. So manganese and iron being the most concerning. They just taste bad. They'll make the water better.
Oh, and you couldn't just soften it.
My issue is
absolutely can. It just costs money. You need a lot of water.
But when you wash your hair, you feel like you never rinsed out the soap.
Yeah, that's hard water.
It has that weird kind of effect. Yeah.
But soft water doesn't taste as good in some respects. It depends what's in it, I guess. Iron's
some people like it. I mean, some people prefer it.
Completely distilled water is really not good. And
the
crazy thing is companies like Coca-Cola, who make their product everywhere, have massive cleaning systems to get their water down to completely distilled, and then they add salts back in.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's Dasani, right? Dasani is literally additive potassium.
It's short for desanitized.
Yes, we have sanitized the water and then desanitized to our specifications.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. It makes it sounds exotic. It's just gross.
Yeah. So the sort of romantic notions of the distillery up in the hills has got more to do with getting access to
I always pictured it was water. Like a mountain brook and some guy was out there with a water, jar, just collecting it, bringing it down to the Coors plant.
One bottle at a time.
Yeah.
It takes more water than the amount of liquid in the bourbon.
Much more.
Because a lot of it's boiled off.
Evaporating off and part of the cooking process and part of the excess. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't get me started on what it takes to make blue jeans, because my wife's in that trade, and if you want to see some nasty effluents,
really,
oh, it's unbelievable. That's why China makes most of the blue jeans these days. They don't care where the effluent goes.
Oh.
Yikes!
How about just we don't wear? Well, I don't want to hurt your wife's business, but what if we don't wear?
This is like the only pants
she'll be all right. Yeah,
like what do you?
I'm not that.
She's very much in the business of trying to clean that process.
Hey, look, it's no pants or blue jeans. It's your choice. But
well, in that case. Really, I don't have a single. I used to, of course, as a kid. I had nothing but dungarees. But I don't have a single pair of blue jeans anymore.
I mean, especially since the work travel has stopped for me for the most part. I mean, even when work travel was the thing, honestly, most of the time I would just wear jeans. I don't know. It's kind of gone by the wayside.
Forever in blue jeans.
Yeah.
Well, I worked with some startups that were trying to do chemical reprocessing of blue jean effluent. Yes.
Wow. But, don't you find they're stiff, Paul, and kind of uncomfortable? And
no, I never wash them, Leo. It's fine.
Oh,
no,
actually, the more you wash them, the softer they get. But they're
that's right. And if you dry them and use less softener, you can. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
They have different grades of these pants now too. You can get like the softer kinds to go.
It was in my youth. That's all anybody wore is blue jeans or. Army surplus sailor pants, which is a kind of a contradiction.
Yeah, but at that time you could wash blue jeans and lean them up against the wall because they were like a.
You could. That's why I don't like them.
I mean, that's not. No, it's not like that.
Not like that anymore. Plus, they kind of smell funny, and maybe it's that effluent. It's the blue jean effluent.
You might want to revisit blue jeans. I think you'd be surprised.
Really? And they fit well and stuff.
Yeah,
they've evolved.
Sure.
They're soft. They're not like, I know they're made of cotton.
They're still blue. I mean, most of them are still blue. You can get different colors, but.
They're dungarees to me. Anyway.
They are dungarees. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not like corduroys. I'm not asking you to wear floods.
I like corduroy. That's soft.
All right. I thought those corduroys were stiff at the time, but okay.
You should wear sweatpants. If I were you and never stood up, I would just wear sweatpants.
Who says I'm wearing pants at all?
Okay, never mind. That's enough of that. All right. That is the pantless Richard Campbell, runasradio.com. That's where you'll find the podcast, Run As Radio, and .NET Rocks. And I love it that you'll find him here. You got a conference coming up in the fall.
Yep. First week of December, Dev Intersection and the Azure Data Conference, along with Azure and AI.
Where's it going to be?
It's going to be in the Swan and Dolphin Hotels in Orlando.
Nice.
And we have keynotes from Eric Boyd and Arun, who now leads the data team, and Jessica Hawk and Scott Hunter.
Very nice.
Scott Hunter, nice.
Yeah.
Very good. The other Scott, as we go.
Where do people go? If they go to Run As Radio, can they find out more?
They'll find it there. It's ads with discount links. You can also go to devintersection.com.
Awesome. Paul Thurrott, his latest book is a nostalgic tour of the history of Windows, Windows everywhere. And of course, he's got and I just saw a recommendation from somebody who says, if you use Windows 11, you got to have Paul Thurrott's Field Guide to Windows 11.
I get every once in a while someone will say something like, I didn't think I was going to learn anything, but I did.
Oh, there's so much.
Unexpectedly useful.
Yes.
Nice. I mean, exactly. I mean, given the source.
It includes the Field Guide to Windows 10, and it's available along with Windows Everywhere at leanpub.com. Of course, Paul's website is thurrott.com, THURROTT.com, and become a premium member there, and you can see some of those nostalgic posts early. And lots of other great stuff. I'm a premium member. Proud premium member. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We do Windows Weekly every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1800 UTC. You can watch us do it live. The production, all of our productions are streamed live at live.twit.tv. There's audio and video there. If you're watching live, chat with us live at irc.twit.tv. Of course, if you're a member of our club, you can chat with us in the Velvet Rope section. the Club Twit Discord, which is
the green room.
The green room. It's a lot of fun, a lot of great stuff going on there. Not just chats, too. We have shows. Paul does hands-on Windows in the club. We've got Micah Sargent's hands-on Macintosh. Scott Wilkinson does his Home Theater Geeks. We have the Untitled Linux Show, the Giz Fizz, Stacy's Book Club, and coming soon, like I think coming tomorrow for the first beta version of our new show all about AI. Jason Howell and Jeff Jarvis will be hosting that with guests from all over the AI industry. That is another club exclusive. We do those because club members pay for them. Club members pay for a lot around here. Frankly, we're just breaking even, which is good. But we don't have deep pockets. So if you want to see these shows continue and you love what you see and you want more, become a supporter. That's the best way to do it. As I said, you get ad-free versions of all the shows. You get access to the Discord. You get special shows we don't put out anywhere else. There are a lot of benefits. It's just $7 a month. I think that's a great deal. To find out more, go to twit.tv/clubtwit. Twit.tv/clubtwit. Member or not, you can get shows at our website, twit.tv/WW for this one. There's also a YouTube channel, which has even more ads. Not that we see any of that revenue, but if you go to twit.tv/WW, you'll see a YouTube link there. It's also links to your favorite podcast players, or you can just enter Windows Weekly in your favorite podcast player and subscribe. And that, frankly, is the best thing you could do for us and for yourself, because that way you'll have Windows Weekly whenever you're in the mood. And sometimes the mood strikes you. You just got to have some Windows Weekly, and then you'll have it. You see, it'll be right there.
I haven't heard someone rant about Windows updates in a while. Is there a
podcast like that? Hey, we're so glad you listened, and we hope you'll come back next Wednesday for another thrilling, gripping edition of Windows Weekly. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye, guys.
Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here. In case you hadn't heard, Home Theater Geeks is back. Each week, I bring you the latest audio-video news, tips and tricks to get the most out of your AV system, product reviews, and more. You can enjoy Home Theater Geeks only if you're a member of Club Twit, which costs $7 a month, or you can subscribe to Home Theater Geeks by itself for only $2.99 a month. I hope you'll join me for a weekly dose of Home Theater Geekitude.